The night Ethan Holloway drove into that blizzard, he told himself it was just another job. He was wrong. What waited for him at the end of that road wasn't a broken furnace. It was a woman trying to hold her world together with bare hands. A little girl who hadn't smiled in months. And the beginning of something Ethan had spent 3 years convincing himself he no longer deserved. But before any of that could happen, he had to survive the storm first. If you've ever lost something you thought you'd never get back, stay with me. Because this story is for you. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this one travels. The call came in at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening in January, and Ethan almost didn't answer it. He was sitting at his kitchen table in Millbrook, Montana, eating cereal for dinner because he hadn't gone grocery shopping in 11 days, and the only other option was a can of soup that had expired sometime in October. His daughter, Maya, was at his mother's place across town, a Tuesday night arrangement that had started as temporary and quietly become permanent. And the house was doing that thing it always did when he was alone in it, settling into a silence so complete it had texture to it, like something you could press your palm against and feel pushing back. The television was on in the other room. He wasn't watching it. It was just noise. His phone buzzed against the table and he looked at the screen. Unknown number. He let it ring twice, picked up a spoonful of cereal, set it back down, and answered on the fourth ring. Holloway Heating and Repair. Hi, yes, hi. The voice on the other end was controlled, but barely. Female. She was choosing her words carefully, the way people do when they're trying not to sound as scared as they are. I found your number on a county service listing. I've already called 4 other companies, and none of them will come out tonight because of the weather. Ethan looked toward the window above the kitchen sink. He couldn't see much through the dark, but earlier, before he'd drawn the blinds, the snow had been coming down sideways. Where are you located? He asked. Out past Route 9, about 18 miles east of Millbrook. There's a farmhouse. It belonged to my grandmother. I'm not sure of the exact address, but I can text you the GPS coordinates. 18 miles east on Route 9 in this weather. He did the math automatically, the way he always did. Roads would be bad. Visibility worse. His truck could handle it, probably, but there'd be nothing enjoyable about the drive. What's the problem? The furnace stopped working about 2 hours ago. I've tried everything I know how to try, which isn't much. It's an old system. I don't even know what kind. I'd have to look. And the temperature in here is dropping fast. A pause. I have a 6-year-old daughter with me. There it was. I'll be there in about an hour, Ethan said. Maybe longer depending on the roads. Text me those coordinates. He heard something release in her breathing. Not quite a sigh. More like the sound a person makes when they've been holding themselves rigid for too long. And something finally gives an inch. Thank you, she said. Thank you, seriously. He hung up, pushed the cereal bowl to the side, and went to get his boots. The drive out took closer to an hour and 20 minutes. Route 9 east of Millbrook was a 2-lane road under normal conditions, which these were not. The county plows had come through at some point in the afternoon, but the snow had reclaimed everything since then, and Ethan drove with both hands on the wheel and his high beams cutting maybe 40 feet into the white. He passed 2 cars that had pulled off onto the shoulder, hazards blinking through the dark like distress signals from another planet. He didn't stop. Nothing he could do for them that a phone call to county dispatch couldn't do better. His truck was a 2019 F250 with a plow rig he used in the winters to supplement income when heating calls slowed down. It was probably the most capable vehicle in Millbrook for weather like this, which was the only reason the drive was merely unpleasant rather than genuinely dangerous. He kept his speed at 22 miles an hour and didn't try to push it. Ethan Holloway was 32 years old, though he felt older than that on most days. He'd grown up in Millbrook, gone 2 years to a vocational program in Billings, come back and built his business from nothing. 3 clients in the first year, then word of mouth, then a truck, then a second truck he had to sell when things got tight after Claire died. He'd started over more times than he liked to count, and he'd learned somewhere in that process that the only real cure for most problems was showing up when you said you would and doing the work in front of you. Claire had been gone for 3 years and 2 months. He didn't count the days anymore. He'd stopped that sometime in the second year, but he always knew the month. March. She'd had an aneurysm in the kitchen while she was making coffee on a Sunday morning, and by the time the ambulance arrived, there was nothing to be done. Maya had been 4. She didn't remember much about her mother now, which was its own particular kind of grief. Watching your child grow up with a gap where a parent should be, a gap she didn't quite understand the shape of yet. He didn't like thinking about any of that, so he focused on the road. The GPS coordinates led him off Route 9 onto a dirt track that had become entirely indistinguishable from the surrounding field, marked only by a split-rail fence on the left side that he followed slowly until the farmhouse materialized out of the dark. A 2-story structure with a wraparound porch, every light inside burning, a warm square against all that white. He pulled up in front and killed the engine. Even from inside the truck he could hear the wind. It came off the open farmland from the northwest and hit the house broadside, a low moan that you felt more than heard. He grabbed his toolbox from behind the seat, pulled his jacket tighter, and made it from the truck to the front porch in about 15 seconds that felt considerably longer. Before he could knock, the door opened. Charlotte Sterling was not what he expected, though he couldn't have said afterward exactly what he had expected. She was about his age, maybe a year or 2 younger, with dark hair that she'd pulled back in the kind of haphazard way that meant she'd done it quickly and hadn't thought about it since. She was wearing a thick wool sweater, jeans, and 2 pairs of socks, and she was holding a mug of something hot that was almost certainly the only warm thing left in the house. She had the kind of face that looked like it had been recently reorganized around a decision, like she'd resolved something earlier that day and was still settling into the resolution. "Mr. Holloway," she said. It wasn't a question. "Just Ethan." He stomped his boots on the porch mat. "Can I come in?" "Please." She stepped back. "I'm Charlotte. I'm sorry." "Come in." Obviously, I'm not thinking straight. The inside of the house hit him immediately. Cold, but not dangerously cold yet. Maybe 55 degrees, he guessed. The kind of cold that crept rather than attacked. She had 3 battery-powered lanterns set up in the living room and a pile of blankets on the couch that looked recently vacated. The house itself was interesting. It was an old farmhouse, probably 80 years old at the bones, but whoever had been living here most recently had done a serious job of making it livable. The kitchen was clean, the furniture was actual furniture, rather than the random accumulation of a place nobody cared about. And there were children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, with a care that said someone paid attention to those things. "Where's the mechanical room?" Ethan asked. "Down the hall, door on the left before the bathroom. I'll show you." "I can find it. You don't have to—" "I want to understand what's wrong," she said. Not defensively, just matter of fact. He looked at her for a second. "Okay." The furnace was in a narrow utility room that also housed the water heater and a chest freezer. It was an old forced air system, a carrier unit that Ethan estimated was at least 25 years old based on the model format, possibly older. He crouched in front of it and started running through his diagnostics, checking the thermostat leads, the igniter, the limit switch, while Charlotte stood in the doorway with her mug and watched. Most clients didn't stay. They showed you the problem and went back to wherever they'd been and reappeared when you were done. He was used to working alone in people's basements and utility closets and crawl spaces, which was fine with him. But Charlotte didn't leave, and she didn't do the other thing people sometimes did, which was ask questions every 45 seconds. She just stood there, and after a minute or 2, the silence stopped feeling like pressure and started feeling like something else. "The igniter's cracked," he said finally. "That's the main issue. There may also be a problem with the draft inducer motor. I can hear it struggling, but the igniter is what's keeping the burner from lighting. Can you fix it tonight?" "I can fix the igniter. I have a replacement in the truck. It's a common enough part. The draft inducer is a different question. I'll need to see if I can get it running well enough to hold through the night, and then come back tomorrow with the right motor if it needs replacing." Charlotte nodded slowly. "How long?" "Couple hours, probably. Maybe less." "I'll make coffee," she said. He turned back to the furnace. Behind him, he heard her footsteps retreat down the hall toward the kitchen. He was 40 minutes into the repair when the small person appeared in the utility room doorway. She was about 6 years old, with her mother's dark hair and an expression of complete seriousness that seemed at odds with her pajamas, which featured cartoon foxes doing various activities. She was holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She looked at Ethan with the particular directness that children have before they learn to moderate it. "Are you fixing the heater?" she asked. "Trying to." "Mom said you drove here through the storm." "I did." "That seems dangerous." "A little bit," he admitted. She considered this. "My name is Ava." "I'm Ethan." "Do you have kids?" "One, a daughter. Her name is Maya." "How old?" 7. "I'm 6, Ava said with the tone of someone making a point. Then, "Is Maya with you?" "She's at her grandmother's house tonight." "Oh." Another pause. Ava appeared to be running through some internal checklist. "Does Maya like rabbits?" Ethan sat back on his heels and looked at the stuffed animal. It had the compressed, slightly gray look of something that had been washed many times and loved in between. "I think so. I'd have to ask her." "This is Clover," Ava said, holding up the rabbit. "She's 7. So she's the same age as Maya." "That's a coincidence." "Mom says there are no coincidences," Ava said. "She says everything happens because of something else." Ethan thought about that for a second. "Your mom might be right." Ava seemed satisfied with this. She lingered a moment longer in the doorway, then turned and walked back down the hall, the cartoon foxes disappearing into the dark. Charlotte brought him coffee at the 1-hour mark. It was good coffee, not the polite, watered-down version people made for service workers, but real coffee, dark and hot, in an actual mug instead of a paper cup. "The draft inducer," he said, without preamble. "I've been listening to it. I think it's the bearings. They're worn. It's not dead yet, but it's heading that way." Charlotte sat down on the floor of the utility room with her back against the wall, which surprised him enough that he stopped what he was doing for a second. "Sit wherever," she said, noticing his expression. "I own the floor." Something almost like a smile crossed his face. "The motor should last the night. I'm going to order the part tomorrow. It's not something I'd carry on the truck, and come back to replace it. Probably day after tomorrow, depending on shipping." "That works." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "What do I owe you for tonight?" "We can settle that when I finish. Let me get the igniter in first." She nodded. Then, after a moment, "I noticed the other companies wouldn't come out tonight, the ones I called before you." "Weather's bad. It's bad for you too." "Yeah." He returned his attention to the furnace interior. "I've got the right truck for it, and you've got a kid." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "You have one too," she said. "You could have stayed home." He didn't answer that. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer was complicated and the utility room wasn't the place for it. The truth was that he'd driven out because a woman he'd never met had said, "I have a 6-year-old daughter with me," and that had been enough. He didn't examine that too closely. He just did the work. But the furnace came back to life at 9:23 p.m. The burner caught on the first ignition attempt, which was more satisfying than it probably should have been. Ethan listened to the system cycle through its startup sequence: blower motor, heat exchanger, the draft inducer doing its labored but functional job. And when the first warm air came through the vents, he heard Charlotte exhale from behind him. "Oh, thank God," she said. "Give it 20 minutes and the house will start warming up." He began putting his tools back in order. "Keep the thermostat at 68, maybe 69. Don't push it higher than that tonight. I'd rather not stress the system until I can get that motor replaced." "Understood." He packed up his toolbox and followed her back to the kitchen, where Ava was asleep on the couch, under approximately 4 blankets with Clover the rabbit tucked under her chin. The kitchen was warmer already. The utility room was directly below it, and Charlotte poured 2 more cups of coffee without asking if he wanted one, which he didn't object to. "You can sit," she said. He sat at the kitchen table. It was a big old farmhouse table, oak, worn smooth at the edges the way tables get when generations of people have used them for everything from homework to card games to meals that had nothing to do with the food on them. He put his hands around the mug and felt the cold in his fingers beginning to let go. "Is this your grandmother's place?" he asked. "Was." Charlotte sat across from him. "She passed away 18 months ago, left it to me." She glanced around the kitchen. at the drawings on the refrigerator, the mismatched dishes stacked on the open shelving, the ancient cast-iron skillet hanging by the stove. I didn't know what I was going to do with it at first. Thought I'd sell it. Then, things changed, and I needed somewhere to go, and here it was. She said things changed the way people say things changed when they mean something specific and difficult that they're not in the mood to explain to a stranger. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. 4 months? She tilted her head slightly. "It's been good. Mostly. It's quiet, which Ava and I both needed. The nearest school is 20 minutes away, and she started making friends there, which I was worried about." She paused. "The furnace breaking down was not part of the plan." "It never is." "No." She almost smiled. "It never is." He finished his coffee and reached for his jacket. "I'll call you tomorrow with the part estimate for the motor. It shouldn't be expensive. The motor itself isn't a complex part. It's just the labor and the drive out." "The drive," she repeated. "Right. 18 miles in a blizzard." "Road'll be better tomorrow." "You keep doing that," Charlotte said. He paused with his jacket half on. "Doing what?" "Finding the straightforward version of things." She said it without any particular weight behind it, more like she was noting an observation. Most people would have made more of the drive, used it as a reason. Ethan pulled the jacket on the rest of the way. "I'm not most people." She looked at him for a moment in that direct, unguarded way she had. The way she'd looked at him in the utility room doorway when she'd said, "I want to understand what's wrong." Like she was used to reading situations carefully and doing it without pretense. "No," she said. "I'm starting to think you're not." He drove back through the storm the way he'd come, following the split-rail fence back to Route 9, and then the long white tunnel of his headlights west toward Millbrook. The house was still quiet when he got home, still empty. He sat in the driveway for a minute with the engine running, not ready to go inside yet. He did this sometimes, used the truck cab as a kind of decompression chamber between the outside world and the interior of a house that still didn't quite know what to do with just the two of them, him and Maya, moving through rooms designed for more. He thought about the farmhouse, about the drawings on the refrigerator, about Ava in her fox pajamas asking him about Maya with the gravity of a small diplomat conducting preliminary negotiations, about Charlotte sitting on the utility room floor like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she'd decided she wasn't going to perform comfort or formality for a repairman she'd only met an hour ago. He'd liked that. He didn't want to make anything of it. She was a client, she had her own situation. He didn't know the first thing about her beyond what an hour and a half in a utility room had told him. But he'd liked it, the lack of performance, the directness. He went inside, washed the grease off his hands at the kitchen sink, and went to bed. He did not sleep particularly well, which he told himself was because of the coffee. The part came in the following afternoon. Ethan called Charlotte at noon to let her know and to confirm the furnace had made it through the night without problems. It had. She reported the house was warm, Ava had slept fine, and the draft inducer had been making a sound she described as like a slightly annoyed cat, which he told her was acceptable, as analogies went. "I can come out tomorrow morning," he said. "Around 9, if that works." "That works," she said. "I'll have coffee." The drive the next morning was better. The storm had moved through overnight and left behind the particular clarity that follows hard weather in Montana, a brightness so acute it was almost aggressive, the snow-covered fields throwing light at angles that made you want to squint even in the early morning. Route 9 had been plowed. The dirt track to the farmhouse was passable. He arrived at 9:08, and Charlotte opened the door before he got to the porch. She was dressed for the day this time. Jeans, a flannel shirt over a thermal, her hair down. She looked rested. Ava appeared behind her hip immediately, still in fox pajamas, apparently committed to them as a lifestyle. "Ethan," Ava said, like she knew him, like she'd been waiting. "Morning, Ava." "Is Maya at school today?" "She is." "I'm going to school tomorrow." She held up Clover. "Clover doesn't go because she's a rabbit." "That's probably for the best," Ethan agreed. He replaced the draft inducer motor in just under 2 hours, which was about what he'd estimated. The furnace ran clean afterward, the labored sound gone, the system cycling properly, everything working the way it was supposed to. He walked Charlotte through what he'd done and what to watch for, showed her where the filter was, and explained that it needed to be changed every 90 days, which nobody ever remembered. "I'll put it in my calendar," she said. She was leaning against the doorframe of the utility room again, which he was beginning to think might be her default position. Every 90 days. Most people say that. I mean it. She said it without defensiveness, just confirmation. When he was packing up his tools, Ava appeared in the doorway. "Are you staying for lunch?" she asked. Ethan glanced at his watch. It was 11:40. "Ava," Charlotte started. "Mom makes really good grilled cheese," Ava said. "She uses two kinds of cheese, the yellow one and the white one." "The technical names," Charlotte said, with a flat look at her daughter. Ethan picked up his toolbox. He had a call that afternoon, a commercial job in town, routine maintenance on a restaurant system, nothing that couldn't move an hour in either direction. He opened his mouth to say thank you. "I appreciate the offer." "Yeah," he said instead. "Sure." Charlotte looked at him for half a second, recalibrating. Then, "Okay then, two kinds of cheese." They ate at the big farmhouse table. Charlotte made grilled cheese and tomato soup, which was the correct combination for a January afternoon in Montana, and nobody argued about it. Ava sat across from Ethan and told him, in some detail, about a disagreement she'd had with a classmate named Finn over whether wolves were better than foxes. She had strong opinions. Charlotte ate her soup without trying to redirect the conversation, occasionally adding a dry comment that made Ethan's mouth twitch. "Wolves can run 35 miles an hour," Ava said. "Foxes can be sneaky, though," Ethan offered. Ava considered this with the thoroughness it apparently deserved. "Sneaky is good," she conceded. "Finn doesn't think sneaky counts. Finn is wrong about a lot of things." "What else is Finn wrong about?" "He said clouds are just water, but I think they're more than that." "What do you think they are?" "I think they're like the sky's way of thinking. Like when you see a cloud, it's because the sky is working on something." Ethan looked across the table at Charlotte. She was watching her daughter with an expression he recognized, the particular mix of exhaustion and pride and something fiercely private that parents wore when their kids said something unexpected. He knew that expression. He wore it himself, with Maya. "I think Ava might be right," he said. Ava looked very pleased with this assessment. After lunch, Charlotte walked him out to his truck. "She's something," he said, which was inadequate, but the only thing that seemed to fit. "She really is." Charlotte pulled her jacket tighter against the cold. "She's been through a lot for a 6-year-old. She handles it better than she should have to." He didn't ask what kind of a lot. That wasn't his business. "You both seem like you're doing okay out here," he said instead. Charlotte looked across the field, white in every direction, the tree line a dark edge at the far border of the property. "Some days," she said. "Other days it's harder. But I'd rather have the hard days out here than the easy ones somewhere else." He thought he understood what she meant. He thought maybe he'd been living the opposite version of that for 3 years, trying to make the hard days easier by making himself smaller, less present, less anything that could be taken away. He got in the truck. "I'll check in next week," he said through the open window. "Make sure the system's running right." "You don't have to do that." "I know." He put the truck in reverse. "I'll call first." He backed down the dirt track toward Route 9. In his rear-view mirror, Charlotte was still standing in the driveway, watching him go, her arms crossed against the cold. He called the following Wednesday. "The furnace was fine," Charlotte said. "Everything was running well. But the step on the front porch, the second one from the bottom, had been loose since they moved in, and she was worried about Ava catching her foot on it. "I can look at it when I'm out your way," he said. "It's not a heating issue." "I do general repair, too." He pulled up his calendar. "I've got a job out on Route 9 Friday morning. I could stop by on the way back." A pause. "You don't have to manufacture reasons to come out here, Ethan." "I know that. The porch step is a real thing, isn't it?" "Yes." "Then I'll come look at the porch step." Another pause, shorter. "Okay. Come for lunch after." He fixed the porch step on Friday. It was a 20-minute job. The stringer was cracked. He replaced it with a board he had in the truck bed, checked the rest of the steps while he was at it, and found two more that needed attention. He came for lunch after. They ate. Ava showed him something she was building out of cardboard boxes in the living room, an architectural project she described as a city for foxes, which he gathered Finn's position on wolves had not improved. He drove back to Millbrook in the early afternoon with his windows down despite the cold, letting the air move through the cab, thinking about nothing in particular. The week after that, the kitchen faucet was dripping. He came out on a Thursday. The week after that, there was no reason at all, but somehow he was there for dinner on a Saturday, and Maya came with him. And Maya and Ava spent an hour in the backyard in their winter coats building something in the snow that they described as a fox city, apparently a collaborative expansion of the cardboard project. While Ethan and Charlotte sat on the repaired porch steps and drank coffee and said less than they thought and more than they realized. He didn't notice it happening. That was the thing. It wasn't a moment, it was an accumulation of moments, each one unremarkable on its own, each one adding something small to a structure that was taking shape before either of them was paying the right kind of attention. February became March. The snow began retreating at the field edges, leaving the dark soil visible in patches. The light changed, gained weight, you could say, became something more definite. Ethan drove Route 9 often enough now that he knew every landmark. The collapsed barn at mile 3, the two mailboxes side by side that belonged to the Kowalski place, the curve where the fence posts changed from wood to metal. Charlotte had told him, over the course of many evenings and many cups of coffee, the outline of what things changed had meant. Not all at once, not as a confession, but in the way people tell things when they're not trying to tell them. Sideways, through implication, through the specific way she talked about Ava's preferences and her own. Her ex-husband's name was Victor Sterling. He was wealthy, not just comfortable, but the kind of wealthy that operated as a separate category of existence. And he'd spent 4 years using that wealth as a mechanism of control, controlling what Charlotte wore, who she spent time with, what she was allowed to think about the company she ran. Charlotte had built the tech company herself, started it at 24 out of an apartment in Seattle with a co-founder who'd left after the first year, grown it to 200 employees by the time she was 28. And then she'd married Victor at 29, and over the next 2 years he'd methodically inserted himself into the edges of everything she was, pressing until the edges blurred. She'd left him when Ava was 4. The divorce had been expensive and exhausting, and Victor had contested everything. And at the end of it, she'd had her company and her daughter and the farmhouse in Montana, and she'd taken all 3 and come here to breathe. Ethan listened to this without comment, which he'd learned was the right response. He didn't offer perspective or comparison, or the male instinct to problem-solve something that didn't need solving. He just listened, and she talked, and the talking itself seemed to be the point. He told her some things, too. Not in the same way. He was less naturally talkative, had spent 3 years becoming more economical with his words rather than less. But he told her about Claire, about the Sunday morning, about the particular loneliness of raising a child who looked increasingly like her mother, which was a gift and an ache at the same time. Maya has her eyes, he said one evening. They were in the kitchen, Ava asleep upstairs, the farmhouse quiet around them. She got Claire's eyes, and my inability to sit still. It's a lot, some days. Charlotte said, "She sounds wonderful." "She is." He turned his mug on the table, not quite looking at Charlotte. "She's the reason I'm still standing, mostly, which is, I know that's a lot to put on a 7-year-old. I try not to let her see it." "They see it anyway," Charlotte said quietly. "Kids always see it." He looked up. "Ava knew something was wrong with me long before I told her anything," Charlotte said. "She used to climb into my bed at night and put her hand on my face. Just rest it there. She was 4. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "they see it." The kitchen was warm. Outside, the March wind moved through the tree line at the far edge of the property. Maya was spending the night at his mother's. She'd become friends with a girl who lived 2 streets over, and Saturdays had become a standing sleepover situation that had solved an entire category of logistics. He should probably go home. He had work in the morning. He didn't go home until 11, and the drive back was easy, the road clear, the The stars out in a way that Montana occasionally offered as compensation for everything else it put you through. It was the third week of March when he first allowed himself to think, not feel, but actually think consciously in complete sentences, that something was happening here that he hadn't planned for and couldn't reduce to a service call. He was in the farmhouse's back room, which Charlotte was slowly converting from storage to an actual room she could use as an office when she needed to work from home. He was helping her move boxes, which was not a skill that required any particular expertise, but which he had nevertheless shown up to assist with on a Saturday afternoon. Maya and Ava were in the backyard despite the cold, doing something with sticks that apparently required intense discussion. Charlotte was carrying a box past him, and her foot caught on the uneven floorboard, the same board he'd meant to look at last time and forgotten about, and she pitched forward, and he caught her. Both hands, her upper arms, the box dropping and landing, and she laughing at herself immediately, embarrassed and not especially graceful about the moment. "I'm fine," she said, still laughing. "I caught myself." "I caught you," he said. She was right there. He was right there. And it would have been very easy to step back. He knew that's what he should do. That's what made sense. There were approximately 10 good reasons to step back. And he did. Because he needed to. Because the moment had already said everything it needed to say. And he wasn't ready to have the conversation that came after. Charlotte straightened up, picked up the box, and didn't look at him for about 30 seconds, which told him the moment had said everything to her too. "The floorboard," he said. "What?" "I'll fix the floorboard while I'm here." "Right," she said. "The floorboard." He fixed the floorboard. She didn't mention the moment. He didn't mention the moment. Maya and Ava came inside for hot chocolate at 4 o'clock, tracking mud on the kitchen floor and arguing cheerfully about whether the stick thing they'd built was a fence or a bridge. And Charlotte made hot chocolate with actual milk heated on the stove and extra marshmallows. And the four of them sat around the big farmhouse table in the early evening light, and the argument about the fence bridge continued without resolution. Ethan sat at that table and looked at his daughter making faces at Ava across the rim of her mug, and something he hadn't felt in 3 years moved through him. Not like a wave, nothing that dramatic, more like a shift in pressure, the way a house sounds different after you've fixed something. He drove home that night knowing 2 things he hadn't known that morning: that he was in trouble, the best kind, and that he was absolutely terrified. Neither of them said anything about it. March turned to April, and April became its own kind of thaw. The field softening, mud season arriving with its particular texture of beauty and inconvenience, the light coming earlier each morning. Ethan's business picked up as the heating calls slowed and people started thinking about the other things that had broken over winter. He was busy. He was always busy. He drove out to the farmhouse on a Tuesday evening in mid-April with no professional reason whatsoever. He told himself when he got in the truck that he was going because the fence on the south side of the property needed attention, and he'd noticed it last week. But the fence could have waited, and he knew the fence could have waited. Charlotte was on the porch when he pulled up. She was sitting on the repaired steps with a mug and a book and the look of someone who'd been outside for a while and didn't intend to go back in any time soon. She looked up when his headlights hit the house. He got out of the truck. "The fence on the south side," he said. "It's 6:30 in the evening," she said. "I had time." She looked at him the way she had that first night in the utility room, reading the situation, finding its actual edges. Then she held up the book. "I'll be here," she said. He fixed the south fence in about 45 minutes, by which point the light was going. He came back to the porch and sat down on the steps below Charlotte, and she handed him the mug without saying anything. It was her mug, which meant he was drinking her coffee. And he drank it without saying anything either, and they watched the dark come in over the fields. "Ava's at a sleepover," Charlotte said. "Her first one, at Priya's house." "How is Ava about sleepovers?" "She called me twice before dinner and once after to report that everything was fine." A beat. "I think she was reporting for her benefit more than mine. Maya does that too. Checks in and then is completely unreachable." "They figure out that they're okay," Charlotte said. "Which is the point." He handed the mug back up to her. Their hands didn't quite touch, almost, and then not. He was aware of almost. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. I want to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." He waited. "I haven't done this," she said. "Whatever this is. I haven't done this in a long time, and I'm not very good at saying things directly because for most of the last 5 years, saying things directly got me in trouble. So I'm going to say it anyway because I think not saying it is starting to cost me something, and I'd rather be direct and awkward than not direct at all." She stopped. "I think you know what I'm trying to say." "I do," he said. "And?" He looked at the dark fields for a moment. There was a particular kind of fear he'd carried for 3 years. Not of being hurt, though that was part of it, but of wanting something and having it taken away. Of getting it wrong. Of Maya watching him get it wrong. He knew the fear by name at this point. He'd been living with it so long it had furniture. "I'm scared," he said. It was easier to say than he'd expected, because it was true and she'd been honest with him, and the least he could do was give her the same thing back. "I've been scared since about the second time I drove out here." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Me too," she said. The Montana dark settled around the porch. Somewhere in the field, something moved. A deer, probably, working its way along the tree line. The mud-season smell of it all, earth and cold water, and the beginning of something. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said. She didn't answer that with words. She reached down and put her hand briefly on his shoulder, just for a second, and then took it back. And they sat with the quiet between them, that was not an empty quiet, but the other kind. The kind that had weight and warmth to it, that meant something was there. He stayed until nearly 10. He drove home with his window down in the April cold, the air moving through the truck, and he was smiling before he realized he was doing it. The thing about April in Montana is that it doesn't arrive gently. It comes in stages, each one a negotiation between what winter wants to keep and what the ground is finally willing to give back. Some mornings the frost was still hard enough to crunch under your boots, and by afternoon the mud was ankle-deep in the low spots, and by evening the light had that particular quality, long and amber and almost apologetic, that made you forget the hard months entirely. Ethan drove Route 9 east toward the farmhouse on a Thursday afternoon with Maya in the passenger seat, his daughter's feet up on the dash, despite his standing policy against this, a policy he'd stopped enforcing sometime around the third time he'd asked. "Are we going to Charlotte's?" Maya asked. "We're going to the farmhouse, yeah." "Is Ava going to be there?" "Should be." Maya turned toward the window with a satisfaction she didn't try to conceal. She was 7 years old and had recently arrived at the conclusion that Ava Sterling was one of the more interesting people she'd encountered, a conclusion she'd reached independently and held with the quiet confidence of a child who trusted her own judgment. She'd told Ethan once that Ava was weird in a good way, which he'd taken as high praise because Maya didn't give high praise easily. "Can we stay for dinner?" Maya asked. "We'll see." "That means yes." "That means we'll see." She made a non-committal sound and went back to the window. He'd been thinking about the Tuesday evening on the porch for 2 days. Not obsessively. He was too busy for obsessive, or at least that's what he told himself. But it was there, the way a sound is there after it's stopped, still occupying space in your head. Charlotte had said what she'd said. He'd said what he'd said. And then they'd sat in the Montana dark for a while and nothing dramatic had happened, which was probably the right way for it to go. He didn't trust dramatic. Dramatic had a short shelf life. What he trusted was this, the familiarity of the drive, the split rail fence appearing on the left, the farmhouse materializing out of the late afternoon light. What he trusted was Ava flinging open the front door before he'd finished parking, Clover the rabbit in one arm, and the other windmilling hello, Maya already out of the truck and running before he'd cut the engine. Charlotte was in the kitchen doorway, watching the kids collide in the front yard with the particular expression she had, amused and a little tired and something else underneath both of those things that he was learning to read. "You're early," she said. "I finished the Hendersons' job faster than I thought." "Maya's taller," Charlotte said. "Did she grow since last week?" "She eats constantly. I can't explain it." Charlotte turned back into the kitchen. He followed her in. The farmhouse had changed since January. Not dramatically. Charlotte wasn't a person who did things dramatically. but in the accumulated way that a house changes when someone is actually living in it rather than just occupying it. There were more drawings on the refrigerator. A bookshelf in the living room that hadn't been there in February, filled with actual books instead of the cardboard box stand-ins she'd been using. A braided rug in the front hallway that he was fairly sure he'd tripped on once, and she'd never acknowledged. The kitchen itself had the smell of something cooking, garlic, tomatoes, the low, heavy warmth of something that had been on the stove for a while. "Sauce," Charlotte said without him asking, "from a jar, before you say anything." "I wasn't going to say anything." "You had a look." "I don't have a look." She turned from the stove and gave him an absolutely level stare that communicated, without ambiguity, that he very much had a look. He hung his jacket on the hook by the door. There was a hook by the door now. There hadn't been one in January. And sat at the kitchen table. "How's the week been?" he asked. "Long." She stirred the sauce. "We had a board call Tuesday that went 2 hours over. I had to take it from the car while Ava was at school because the farmhouse Wi-Fi is—" She made a gesture with the spoon that covered a large territory of frustration. "What it is." Charlotte's company was something Ethan had been slowly learning about in the way he learned most things about her, gradually, through context, without asking direct questions that felt intrusive. Sterling Tech was its actual name. She'd kept the name after the divorce, she'd told him, because she'd built it before Victor, and it was hers, not his, and she wasn't going to rename something she'd built just because the marriage had failed. It did something with data security infrastructure, which he understood approximately 15% of in technical terms, but could follow the outlines of from the way she talked about it. Problems to solve, people to manage, the constant work of holding something together that had 100 moving parts. She ran it remotely from the farmhouse 3 days a week and went to the company's billings office on Tuesdays when she could manage it, and the rest of the time she was a woman in Montana raising her daughter and fixing her grandmother's house. And those two versions of her existed side by side in a way that he found. He searched for the word and landed on admirable, which was accurate but inadequate. "The board giving you trouble?" he asked. Charlotte set down the spoon and leaned against the counter. "They think I should be in Seattle, full-time or close to it. We have an expansion planned for Q3 and they want me more visible." She looked at the window over the sink, through it, toward the field outside. "They're not wrong exactly. It would be easier, but Ava just settled into her school and I'm not moving her again." "What do you tell them?" "That I'm managing it remotely and the numbers show it." She paused. "Which is true, but they don't love it." Ethan nodded. He didn't offer a solution because there wasn't a simple one and she didn't need him to pretend otherwise. "How's your week?" she asked. "Good. Busy. I'm losing Danny at the end of the month. My technician, he's been with me 2 years. He's moving to Bozeman. His wife got a job there." "Are you going to hire someone?" "Probably have to. I've been doing more solo work lately and it's fine, but it means I can't take as many jobs." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Finding someone out here who knows HVAC and will actually show up is its own project." "Put up a posting in Billings. Cast a wider net." "Yeah, probably." The kids thundered in from outside, muddy in the specific way that children get muddy when given adequate time in a yard in April, and the conversation shifted the way conversations did when two adults who had been talking by themselves suddenly had two children in the room, seamlessly, without resentment, just a different mode. Maya had an update on the Fox City, which had apparently entered a new phase of development involving a water feature. Ava had opinions about where the water feature should go. Both of them had opinions about dinner, specifically about whether garlic bread was a possibility, and Charlotte said she'd see what she had, and Ethan got up and looked in the bread drawer without being asked and found half a baguette, and Charlotte raised an eyebrow at him. Going through her bread drawer, and he raised one back and neither of them said anything about it. They stayed for dinner. May arrived and with it a warming that finally meant it. The snow was gone from all but the highest north-facing slopes. The fields around the farmhouse turned from mud to green over the course of about 2 weeks, faster than seemed reasonable, the way Montana vegetation operated as if compensating for the months it had been suppressed. Charlotte ordered seeds and planted things along the south side of the house in a strip of raised beds that her grandmother had apparently maintained, and that had been fallow since her death. She was not, she told Ethan, particularly experienced at this. I've killed 2 basil plants already, she said. They were standing at the edge of the raised beds on a Saturday morning, looking at the optimistic rows of seedlings she'd put in the week before. In the same pot, sequentially. Basil is hard, Ethan said. Everyone says that. Why does anyone grow it if it's hard? Because it smells good when it works. Charlotte crouched down and pressed her finger into the soil, checking moisture the way she'd read about in the 3 gardening articles she'd told him she'd researched before planting anything, because Charlotte did not do things without research. She was that way about everything, thorough in a way that wasn't perfectionism, more like she'd learned not to trust information she hadn't verified herself. The tomatoes look okay, she said. They do. Ava wants to grow pumpkins. She stood up, brushing soil off her knee. For October. I told her we'd try 1 plant and not to get attached. Smart. She immediately named the seedling Gerald. So much for not getting attached. Charlotte laughed. A real one, not the polite version she used with people she didn't entirely trust. He'd noticed early on that she had 2 different registers of laugh, and the real one was quieter and came with a slight exhale, and he'd started paying attention to which one he was getting. He got the real one most of the time now. He wasn't sure she knew that he'd noticed. Maya appeared from the direction of the barn. Charlotte's grandmother had kept it for storage, and the girls had annexed it as a general-purpose space for projects that required space and tolerance for mess. With Ava behind her, both of them carrying something that turned out to be a very large cardboard tube of unclear provenance. We need this, Maya announced. For what? Ethan asked. The water feature. For the Fox City. It's going to be the tunnel. Where did you find a cardboard tube that size? It was in the barn, Ava said. Behind the old tractor. We asked it if we could use it, and it said yes. Charlotte looked at Ethan. He looked at Charlotte. Neither of them addressed the methodology by which they'd consulted the cardboard tube. Okay, Charlotte said, but it stays in the barn. The girls retreated with their tube, already deep in a planning conversation. Charlotte watched them go, and her expression was the one he'd seen more and more in the past month, the one that had something settled in it, something that hadn't been there in January. She didn't look like a woman running from something anymore. She looked like a woman who had arrived somewhere and was cautiously deciding to stay. She's happy, Charlotte said. She didn't have to specify who. So is Maya, he said. Charlotte looked at him sidelong, and he held the look, and the spring morning sat around them with its smell of turned earth and new grass, and he thought, this is a thing I did not expect and cannot account for, and am not going to waste time arguing about. It was a Wednesday in the 3rd week of May, when it first became something said aloud rather than something understood around the edges. He'd come out in the early evening to look at a section of fence on the property's north side that Charlotte had flagged. The posts were rotting at the base, not fixable, needing replacement. He'd finished the assessment and come inside to find Charlotte at the kitchen table with her laptop and 3 windows open and a look on her face that meant the board call had come early or the quarterly numbers were giving her trouble or both. He made coffee without asking. He set a mug in front of her and sat across the table and did not speak. She closed the laptop after a minute. Victor called my CFO, she said. Ethan waited. Not me. My CFO, Marcus, to ask about the company's Q2 numbers. She said it with a flatness that wasn't absence of feeling, but a way of compressing it. He has no business calling Marcus. He signed away any interest in Sterling Tech in the divorce settlement. He has no stake, no standing, nothing. What was he after? I don't know. Marcus said it was friendly, Victor calling it a courtesy check, keeping in touch with old acquaintances. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Victor doesn't do anything out of courtesy. He wanted information, or he wanted Marcus to tell me he called, or both. Ethan looked at his coffee. Has he tried to contact you directly? Not since March. Before that it was occasionally. Nothing I could call harassment exactly, just enough to remind me he existed. She put her hands flat on the table, a gesture he'd come to recognize as her way of steadying herself. He's going to want more time with Ava this summer. The custody arrangement gives him 2 weeks in July, and he'll want to extend it. He always does. and I spend every spring bracing for that conversation. Can he extend it without your agreement? Not without a motion, but he has lawyers who file motions the way other people send emails. She looked out the window. The evening light was long and sideways. I'm sorry. I don't mean to make this your problem. You're not making it my problem, Ethan said. You're talking to me. Those aren't the same thing. Charlotte looked at him then. Not the assessing look she'd had in January, not the measured directness she used for difficult conversations. Just looking at him in the kitchen light with something in her face that was neither composed nor performed. He's going to find out about you, she said. About this, whatever this is. Victor keeps tabs on things, on me specifically. And when he finds out you've been coming out here, he'll use it. Use it how? However he can. Question my judgment, question the environment I'm providing for Ava. He has a gift for turning ordinary things into evidence of something. She picked up her mug. I'm not telling you this to scare you off. I'm telling you because you should know what you might be walking into. Ethan was quiet for a moment. The coffee was hot, and the kitchen was warm, and outside, somewhere in the direction of the barn, he could hear the girls' voices in that indistinct register that meant they were occupied and content. Charlotte, he said. Yeah. I drove 18 miles through a blizzard the first time we met. You think I'm scared of a phone call? She was quiet. I know what I'm choosing, he said. I chose it a while ago. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. The silence that followed had the density of something important being absorbed. Charlotte set down her mug, and Ethan could see her processing it. Not suspiciously, not looking for the catch, but in the way she processed everything, carefully, honestly, with the full weight of her attention. I'm difficult, she said finally. I want to be clear about that. I'm not easy to be with. I have a company I'm running from a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. I have a daughter who names cardboard tubes, and I have an ex-husband who treats life like a chess game, and I'm still figuring out how to not be afraid of what that means. I know, Ethan said. You know, and you're still sitting in my kitchen. I'm sitting in your kitchen? She looked at him for a long moment. Then something in her shoulders dropped. Not defeat, the opposite. Like a decision made. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. And that was the conversation. It wasn't cinematic. Nobody said anything that would read well out of context. But it was true, which was more than either of them had been used to for a long time. And truth, they'd both learned, had a durability that the prettier versions didn't. June came in warm and easy, the long Montana days stretching until 9 in the evening. The kind of weather that made you want to be outside for all of it because you'd earned it. Ethan started keeping a spare set of work clothes at the farmhouse. He told himself it was practical. He came out often enough that driving home for a change of clothes before a job was inefficient. Charlotte said nothing about it beyond designating a hook in the mudroom, which was efficient and also not nothing. Maya had graduated from 2nd grade and entered the unstructured bliss of summer with her full energy. She spent roughly half her time at Ethan's house and half at his mother's or the farmhouse, a fluid arrangement that had evolved without formal discussion into a thing that worked, which was how the best arrangements usually happened. She and Ava had moved the Fox City from the barn to a section of the side yard that Charlotte had designated as available for projects of uncertain scope, and the two of them were out there most afternoons with an intensity of focus that Ethan found genuinely impressive. On a Thursday evening in the 2nd week of June, Ethan grilled chicken on Charlotte's porch. She had a small gas grill she'd found in the barn, and he'd serviced the igniter on it, because of course he had, while Charlotte sat in the Adirondack chair he'd reinforced after discovering 2 of the joints were failing, her laptop closed beside her, watching the girls in the side yard. Marcus says Victor called again, Charlotte said. She said it matter-of-factly, the way you report the weather. Ethan turned the chicken. Same as before? He asked Marcus if Charlotte was seeing anyone. She kept her voice even. Marcus told him it wasn't an appropriate question and ended the call. Good man, Marcus. He's been with me since year 2. He's the most tactful person I've ever met. She paused. Victor is fishing. He knows something but not the details. Let him fish. I know. She pulled her knees up to her chest. I want to be ahead of it.
I've spent too much time in this relationship being reactive, responding to whatever Victor decided to do rather than being prepared for it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He took the chicken off the heat and set it to rest. Have you talked to your lawyer? He asked. I emailed her yesterday. She said as long as he's going through my CFO rather than directly through me or Ava's school or anything involving the custody arrangement, there's not much to act on, but she's watching. Okay. He brought the platter inside, Charlotte following. Then that's what it is for now. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. You know what I keep thinking about? What? That first night.
You showed up in a blizzard to fix a furnace, and I thought you were just someone who needed the money badly enough to drive in bad weather. She looked at him. I misjudged you pretty badly. You didn't know me. No, but I noticed pretty fast. She moved past him to get plates from the cabinet. Ava noticed before I did, honestly. She came and told me the next morning that you were a good type of person. High praise from a 6-year-old. From Ava. She doesn't say that about everyone. Charlotte set the plates on the table. She said it about 3 people in her whole life before you. Me, her preschool teacher Miss Reyes, and Clover the rabbit. I'm honored to be in that group. You should be. Clover has high standards. He was laughing when the girls came in from outside, arguing with characteristic focus about a structural problem with the Fox Cities water feature, and dinner became what dinner usually became at this table. Loud and specific and interrupted and good in the way that only accidental things could be good, the way nobody planned for and everybody needed. Later, after the girls had been put to bed, Maya on the fold-out in Ava's room, a sleepover that had ceased to be an event and simply become a standing option, Ethan and Charlotte sat on the porch in the summer dark with their coffee going cold in their hands. The evening air was warm enough to sit in without jackets, which still felt like something earned. She called you Dad, Charlotte said. Ethan went still. Ava, at dinner, when she was asking you to pass the bread, Charlotte said it carefully, watching his face. You might not have caught it. It was fast. He had caught it. He'd registered it in the moment and said nothing and kept going because he hadn't known what else to do, and it had been sitting at the back of his chest like something too big to look at directly. I caught it, he said. And? He stared at the dark field. It scared me, he said honestly. And also, he stopped. Also what? He didn't have the exact words for what it had done to him when Ava had said it, the way it had landed somewhere in his chest where he hadn't known there was still room for something to land. It felt like something I didn't know I needed to hear, he said. Charlotte didn't say anything for a moment. When he looked over at her, she was looking at the field too, and her expression was the kind that meant she was working very hard to keep it steady. She loves you, Charlotte said. She's 6 and she doesn't have a complicated relationship with that. She just does. I know. I'm more complicated, Charlotte said. I want you to know I know that about myself. I don't need you to be simple, Ethan said. She looked at him. Simple isn't... He searched for it. Simple isn't what I'm here for. She took a breath and let it out, and leaned her head back against the porch chair. Above them, the Montana sky was doing its summer thing, stars so dense they looked structural, like they were holding something up. We're going to be okay, Charlotte said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. More like someone testing a surface they were about to put their weight on. Ethan looked up at the stars. Yeah, he said. I think we are. He drove home that night at 11, the windows down, the warm summer air moving through the truck, Route 9 lit by a moon that made the fields look like something from a different world entirely. He thought about Ava at dinner, passing the bread. Dad dropping out of her in that easy, unself-conscious way that children say the things that matter most. He thought about Charlotte on the porch, complicated and honest about her complications, trusting him enough to say so. He thought about what trust cost, actually, when you'd given it before and had it taken apart piece by piece. He knew what it cost. He was still paying some of it himself. He drove through Millbrook and past the hardware store where he'd bought the fence boards and the diner where he ate lunch on Thursdays, and the road that turned off toward his mother's house. And eventually he turned into his own driveway and sat in the truck for a minute in the dark, the engine ticking down. The house was quiet the way it always was when Maya wasn't in it. But for the first time in a long while, the quiet felt different. Less like absence and more like space being held open for something. Like the period between when you call out and when the answer comes back. He went inside and went to bed, and he slept better than he had in months. The July custody handoff was supposed to happen on a Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, at a neutral location, a parking lot in Millbrook that Charlotte's lawyer had designated in the original custody agreement because it was public and had a security camera mounted on the hardware store across the street. Charlotte had told Ethan about it 2 weeks in advance, matter-of-factly, the way she handled most things that cost her something, by describing them precisely and not elaborating on how much they cost. Victor would take Ava for 12 days. That was the agreement. 12 days in July, and then another 4 over Christmas, and supervised visits on alternating holidays if Victor bothered to exercise them, which he sometimes did and sometimes didn't, depending on what else he had going on. Charlotte had learned not to predict which it would be. Ethan offered to come to the handoff. Charlotte said no. "I've done this before," she said. "It's easier if it's just me and Ava. Fewer variables." He understood what she meant by variables. He was a variable Victor didn't know the full shape of yet, and introducing an unknown variable into a handoff that needed to go smoothly was bad strategy. Charlotte understood strategy the way she understood most things, from having thought it through completely. "Call me after," he said. "I will." She called at 9:47. He was at a job site in town, replacing a boiler ignition system in a commercial kitchen, and he stepped out into the parking lot to take it. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Fine." A pause that had texture to it. He was polite. He's always polite when there's a camera and a parking lot full of people. Another pause. He looked at my car for a while. He was looking for something. A second car seat maybe, or something that would tell him about you. He didn't find anything because there's nothing to find. "How's Ava?" Charlotte took a breath. She was okay. She held my hand really hard before she got in his car. She's done that every year. She holds my hand until the last possible second, and then she lets go and her face goes sort of careful, like she's putting something away. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say. "I'm going to Billings Tuesday," Charlotte said. "Board meeting. I'll be back Thursday." "Okay, I'll check on the house. You don't have to—" "I know," he said. "I'll check on the house." The 12 days were the longest stretch he and Charlotte had gone without seeing each other since January. He checked on the farmhouse Tuesday and Thursday, as he'd said, mostly walking the property, fixing a section of gutter that had been pulling away from the roofline, making a list of things that needed attention before fall. The house had a different quality when it was empty. Not bad exactly, but like a held breath, like it was waiting. He understood the feeling. Charlotte came back on a Thursday evening, drove straight from Billings, and he happened to be there when she pulled in because he'd been fixing the gutter and hadn't quite finished. She got out of the car and looked at him on the ladder and said, "I thought you were done on Tuesday." "Gutter was worse than I thought." She looked at the gutter, then back at him. "You could have left it." "I could have." She went inside without saying anything else. He finished the gutter, climbed down, put the ladder in the truck. When he came in through the mudroom, she was sitting at the kitchen table with her jacket still on, not looking at anything in particular. He sat across from her. "Long 2 weeks," she said. "Yeah." "I hate it," she said flatly. "Every year I think I'll get better at it, and every year I just hate it differently." She looked at her hands on the table. "She texted me twice. Victor monitors her phone, which he's allowed to do during his time, so she kept it to short things. I'm okay. We went to a lake. That kind of thing." A pause. The second text had a typo. Ava doesn't make typos. She's 6 and meticulous about her texts, which is a whole separate thing I could talk about. But the point is, she made a typo, and I spent 4 hours deciding whether that meant something. Did it? No, she came back fine. She's fine. Charlotte finally took off her jacket. "She's at your mother's with Maya right now, actually. She asked to go. She wanted to see Maya before she even unpacked her bag." He nodded. His mother had agreed to the arrangement without hesitation, in the way she agreed to most things involving children and practical need. She'd been watching Maya 2-3 evenings a week since Claire died, and had expanded her operational scope to include Ava with the same quiet competence she applied to everything. "She's okay," Charlotte said, more to herself than to him. "I know she's okay. I just need a minute to believe it." "Take as many minutes as you need." She looked at him. "You fixed my gutter." The gutter needed fixing. "Ethan." "Charlotte." She almost smiled. It was the almost smile he'd come to recognize as specific to him, the one she didn't quite let all the way out, but that made it to her eyes regardless. "Thank you," she said, "for being here, even when I said you didn't have to be." "Especially then," he said. Ava came back from Victor's quieter than usual. Not sad exactly, but interior, like she'd turned down the volume on herself and was still in the process of turning it back up. Charlotte noticed and said nothing about it directly, which was the right instinct. She cooked things Ava liked, let her set her own schedule for the first few days, and didn't push. It was the fourth day back, a Tuesday, Ava and Maya in the side yard resuming Fox City operations. When Ava appeared in the kitchen doorway, while Ethan and Charlotte were washing up after lunch and said, "Dad said you have a boyfriend, Mom." Charlotte's hands went still in the soapy water. Ethan set down the dish towel, slowly. "What did he say exactly?" Charlotte asked. Her voice was even. He was aware of the effort that cost. Ava leaned against the doorframe, a posture she'd inherited from her mother. "He said you had a repairman who came to the house a lot, and that I should pay attention to what goes on when he's there." She said it the way children report things, accurately, without editorial. Then she looked at Ethan. "That's you. You're the repairman." "That's me," Ethan agreed. "I told him you fix things," Ava said, "and that you make really good grilled cheese." She appeared to consider this sufficient counter-argument. He didn't seem to think that was important information. Charlotte pulled her hands out of the water and dried them on the dish towel Ethan had set down. "Come here, Bug." Ava came over and Charlotte crouched down to her level. "Did it bother you?" Charlotte asked. "What your dad said." Ava thought about it with genuine seriousness. "A little. He said it like it was a bad thing, but Ethan's not a bad thing." She looked at Ethan again over her mother's shoulder. "Are you?" "I'm trying not to be," Ethan said. Ava nodded, satisfied. "That's what I told him." Charlotte stood up and Ava went back outside, the conversation apparently closed in her mind, complete. Charlotte turned to the window over the sink and stood there for a moment with her arms crossed and her back to Ethan. "He planted that," she said. Quiet, controlled. "He asked her to tell me." "I know. He's been doing this since the divorce, using her as a messenger, a spy. He doesn't do it constantly, just enough that I can't call it a pattern without sounding paranoid." She turned around. "I'm going to call my lawyer." "Good. I should have called her 2 weeks ago when he contacted Marcus again." "Call her now." She did, that afternoon. Ethan was on the porch repainting the section of railing he'd repaired in the spring, listening to Charlotte's side of the conversation through the open window. Measured, specific, her lawyer voice, which was different from all her other voices, compressed and precise, and entirely without hedging. When she came out to the porch, she had her phone in her hand and the look she wore when she'd made a decision. "She's documenting it," Charlotte said. "The calls to Marcus, what Ava said today. It may not be enough to modify the custody terms yet, but it's a paper trail." She looked at the railing he was painting. "She also asked about you, my lawyer. She wanted to know who you were." "What did you tell her?" Charlotte looked at him for a moment. "I told her you were the person I trusted most, outside of Ava." She said it the way she said important things, directly, without setup or softening. She said that was good, that having a stable person in the household picture was good for the custody argument. He kept painting. "Is that the only reason it's good?" "No," Charlotte said. "It's not the only reason." August in Montana was the month that justified all the others. The light was different, warmer and more horizontal, even at noon, like it was already thinking about leaving. The fields around the farmhouse were golden in a way that made you want to stand still and just look at them, and occasionally Ethan did, usually when he was supposed to be doing something else. He'd hired a new technician in late July,
a 26-year-old named Derek who'd done his training in Great Falls and was solid, if slow, and who had the useful quality of asking questions rather than guessing. Having Derek meant Ethan had more flexibility in his schedule, which meant he was at the farmhouse more often, which had stopped being a thing either of them tracked or accounted for, and had simply become the shape of things. Maya had started calling Charlotte by her name without the self-consciousness she'd had in the spring. She'd also started leaving things at the farmhouse. A book, a jacket, once a homework assignment that caused a 20-minute search at Ethan's house before he remembered where he'd last seen it. He wasn't sure what to make of that, except that it was true, and that Maya was 7 and operating on pure instinct, which usually knew things before the adults did. It was the second Saturday in August, late afternoon, when Victor Sterling's car came down the dirt track. Ethan was on the porch, not fixing anything, just sitting. The first time he'd just sat on that porch for no professional reason, with a glass of iced tea and the early evening light making the fields look like something worth staying for. Charlotte was inside putting Ava down for a nap. Ava had insisted she was too old for naps while simultaneously falling asleep at the kitchen table 30 minutes earlier, which was a dynamic Charlotte had learned to navigate with the patience of someone who had been through it many times. He heard the car before he saw it. Tires on the dirt track, moving fast. Too fast for a dirt road, the kind of speed that was either emergency or aggression. He stood up before the car came around the bend. It was a black Mercedes, new, with Seattle plates. It parked badly. Diagonal, too close to the porch steps, the way people park when they want to communicate something with the parking. The man who got out was 50 feet away, but Ethan could read him immediately. Tall, expensive coat despite the heat, the particular posture of someone who had spent years being the most important person in every room and had started to mistake that for a natural law. Victor Sterling. He was 40, maybe 42, with the kind of face that had been handsome 10 years ago and was in the process of renegotiating with time. His eyes went to Ethan first, a quick, assessing sweep, and then to the house behind him. "Is Charlotte here?" Not a greeting, a demand formatted as a question. "She's inside," Ethan said. He didn't move away from the porch steps. Victor looked at him again, longer this time. "And you are?" "Ethan Holloway. The repairman." Victor said it the way you'd say the help, with just enough neutrality that you couldn't call it outright contempt, and just enough weight that you felt it regardless. "That's right," Ethan said. "I need to speak with Charlotte." "She's busy. You could try calling." Something moved across Victor's face, a flicker of recalibration. He wasn't used to being told no by people without expensive lawyers. He looked at the house again and then back at Ethan, and his expression settled into the kind of patience that was actually its opposite, controlled aggression, wearing patience as a coat. "Tell her Victor's here," he said. Ethan was still standing at the top of the porch steps. He didn't move, not blocking exactly, just present, which was its own kind of information. "You could call her," he said again. "I don't need to call her at her own house." "You're not on the custody schedule today. Today's, my understanding, is just a regular Saturday." Victor stared at him. "Who do you think you are?" "Ethan Holloway," Ethan said again, with the same tone he'd used the first time. "I said that already." The front door opened behind him. Charlotte stepped out onto the porch and stopped when she saw the car, and then the man beside it. Her body didn't do anything dramatic. She didn't step back, didn't reach for him. She just went very still in the way she did when she was processing something and deciding how to process it. "Victor," she said. "Charlotte." He spread his hand slightly, a gesture that was supposed to communicate harmlessness and achieved the opposite. "I was in the area. I wanted to see Ava." "You're not scheduled to see Ava today." I know. I thought maybe we could be flexible." He smiled, and the smile was practiced in a way that was visible if you were paying attention. "Just for an hour. I brought her something from Seattle." "You can coordinate through your lawyer," Charlotte said. "You know that." "I was just driving by." "You were just driving by on a dirt road 18 miles off Route 9. Charlotte kept her voice level. "Victor, this isn't something I can accommodate without notice. If you want additional time with Ava, file the request the right way." Victor's eyes moved to Ethan again, stayed there. "This is who you're raising my daughter around," he said.
Not a question anymore. A statement designed to land somewhere. Ava is my daughter, Charlotte said. And yes. Something shifted in Victor, subtle, like a pressure change before weather. His jaw adjusted slightly. The practiced ease left his face, and what was underneath it was colder and more familiar. The expression of someone who'd decided the social niceties had served their purpose. You should know, Victor said to Charlotte, but looking at Ethan, that I've spoken to my attorneys about the current situation. The living arrangement, the amount of time a man Ava's never been properly introduced to has been spending at her residence. It's something the court will want to understand. Then they'll understand it, Charlotte said. Through the appropriate channels. Charlotte. Victor. Her voice was still even, still controlled. You need to leave now. Victor stood by his car for a moment that was exactly 2 seconds longer than necessary, making a point of the 2 seconds, making sure Ethan registered them. Then he opened the car door. This conversation isn't finished, he said. Yes, it is, Charlotte said. Good night, Victor. He got in the car and pulled out the way he'd come in, too fast again, the Mercedes kicking up a rooster tail of dry August dust. They watched it go until the sound of the engine faded into the field noise. Then Charlotte sat down on the top porch step like someone had cut a cord, not dramatically, just suddenly without the energy for standing. Ethan sat beside her. How much of that did Ava hear, Sa? He asked. She's asleep. She didn't hear any of it. Charlotte pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a moment. He's been drinking. I know. He'd smelled it when Victor got close enough. Not sloppy drunk, the precise kind of drunk that knows exactly how much it can consume and still function, still project control. The worst kind. He drove here drunk, Charlotte said. He drove to a house with children in it, drunk, in August heat, on a dirt road. She lowered her hands. My lawyer is going to love this. Did you get his plates on your phone's camera? Charlotte looked at him. No. Mine did, Ethan said. He'd had his phone in his hand when the car came around the bend and had taken 3 photos before Victor got out, a reflex he couldn't fully explain except that something in the car's speed had told him to. Charlotte took a breath. Okay. She took another one. Okay, that's good. He waited. She was running through it, he could tell. The implications, the next steps, the sequence of events that Victor had just set in motion with his drunk Saturday drive down a dirt road. Charlotte's mind worked like that. Linear, cause and effect, always calculating the downstream of any given thing. He's going to file something, she said. This was reconnaissance. He wanted to see you, confirm you existed, confirm you were here. Now he's going to file for extended custody, maybe a modification, use you as the angle. She looked at the dust still settling on the dirt track. I've been expecting this since May. I'm almost relieved it's happening instead of waiting for it. Is that true? Ethan asked. She thought about it. 70%, she said. The porch was quiet. From inside the house, through the open window, he could hear the sound of Ava sleeping. Not literally, but the quality of silence that a sleeping child creates in a house, a certain weighted stillness. He looked at you like you were nothing, Charlotte said. I want you to know I'm aware of what that cost. It didn't cost me anything, Ethan said. You held your ground the entire time. He needed to see that somebody would. He picked up his iced tea from where he'd set it on the railing, found it had gone warm, and drank it anyway. He's used to people moving out of his way. I've met men like that. They rely on it. The whole operation requires people to step back. He set the glass down. I'm not a person who steps back. Charlotte looked at him sidelong. I've noticed. I know you have. She leaned back slightly, not quite resting against him, close enough that the warmth of her shoulder was at his arm. They sat like that for a while in the August evening, the fields going amber, the Fox City visible from where they sat, the cardboard tube, the stick water feature, Ava and Maya's collective architectural vision arranged in the side yard. I'm going to need to tell Ava something, Charlotte said. She's going to ask why her dad came by. She notices everything. What will you tell her? The truth, the age-appropriate version. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. I've tried really hard not to put her in the middle. Victor doesn't try at all. You heard what he did with the messaging thing, but I genuinely try. She paused. It gets harder when he shows up drunk at the house. You've been doing it right, Ethan said. She's solid. Whatever you've been doing, it's working. Charlotte was quiet. She's solid because she has you, he said. That's the single biggest reason. He felt rather than saw Charlotte absorb that. She didn't respond immediately. She had the quality of sitting with things before she answered them, which he'd come to appreciate as a genuine trait rather than a delay. I'm scared, she said. Just that. Simple and unadorned, the way she'd said things since she'd started trusting him. I know, he said. I fought him once already. The divorce. It was 2 years of my life, and at the end of it, I had Ava and the farmhouse, and I was so tired I couldn't get off the couch for 2 weeks. She looked at her hands. I can't do that again. You won't have to do it the same way, Ethan said. Last time it was just you. It's not just you anymore. She looked at him. In the August light, her face was tired and certain and something else. The look of someone who had decided, without drama, to let something hold some of the weight. You mean that? She said. Not a question, just recognition. I mean it, he said. The call from Charlotte's lawyer came on a Wednesday morning, 10 days after Victor's visit. Ethan was at a job site in Millbrook. Annual maintenance on a school district boiler system, the kind of work that kept the lights on. When Charlotte texted, call when you can. Not urgent, but important. He called on his lunch break, sitting in the truck with a sandwich he wasn't eating. He filed, Charlotte said. Motion to modify the custody arrangement. He's asking for equal shared time, 50-50, citing my remote work schedule, the farmhouse's distance from Ava's school, and, she paused, and the presence of an undisclosed adult male in Ava's primary residence. There it was. Ethan had expected it, and it still landed with weight. What does your lawyer say? He asked. She says it's aggressive, but not strong. The distance from the school actually works in my favor. Ava's been attending consistently. Her teacher has nothing but positive things to say, and the school is 20 minutes away, which is completely normal for rural Montana. The remote work thing is harder. Victor's lawyers will try to frame it as a neglect of parenting duties, which is, he could hear her working to keep her voice level, which is so far from the truth I almost don't know how to be angry about it appropriately. And me? He said. She wants to know if you'd be willing to be deposed. He didn't hesitate. Yes. Ethan, Charlotte. Yes. A pause. It means giving a formal statement about your time at the farmhouse, your relationship with Ava, with me. Victor's lawyers will have access to it. They'll use it if they can. Let them. He picked up the sandwich, put it back down. There's nothing there they can use. We've done nothing wrong. I know that. But Victor's lawyers are very good at making nothing look like something. So is your lawyer. That's what you're paying her for. He leaned back in the driver's seat. Charlotte, I drove through a blizzard in January to fix your furnace. I'm not going to refuse to sit down with a lawyer in August. The silence on the line had the quality of something being accepted. Okay, she said. She'll reach out to you directly. Good. Ethan, I need you to know, if this gets complicated, if it gets ugly, stop, he said. Not harshly. Don't finish that sentence. I'm trying to give you an out. I know you are. He looked out the windshield at the school's parking lot, the maintenance crew van ahead of him, a normal Wednesday in a town he'd spent his whole life in. I don't want it. I know what I'm choosing. I've known for a while. A long pause. Then, the kids are doing a presentation of the Fox City this weekend. Ava's been working on an introduction speech. She practiced it on me this morning. I'm not exaggerating, it was 8 minutes long. The abrupt subject change was so characteristically Charlotte that he almost laughed. 8 minutes. She timed herself on my phone. I was informed that the speech is the right length for the subject matter. She's not wrong. She's not wrong, Charlotte agreed. And then, quietly, underneath the logistics and the lawyer calls and the motion to modify, and all the weight of what was coming. Thank you for the blizzard and everything after it. He sat with that for a second.
Thank you for calling a repairman and not giving up when the first four said no, he said. She made a sound that was half laugh, half something more complicated. Then, I'll see you Saturday. Saturday, he said. He drove back to the school's boiler room and spent the rest of the afternoon with his hands in machinery, the way he always settled himself when something had too much shape to hold all at once. The work was straightforward and specific and required his attention, and he gave it his full attention. And afterward he drove back to Millbrook through the August heat with the windows down and the late-day sun going orange behind the mountains. Whatever was coming, it was coming. He'd known it for months, felt it building the way you feel a pressure system moving in, the air changing before the clouds. Victor Sterling was not a man who conceded things gracefully or early. He was a man who needed to be beaten, properly and on the record, before he'd stop. Ethan was familiar with work that needed doing. He turned off Route 9 toward home and thought about Saturday, and Ava's 8-minute speech, and the Fox City, and Maya's face when she was fully engaged in something she cared about, lit up from inside in a way that still astonished him after 7 years. He thought about the farmhouse on a Saturday afternoon with the summer light on the kitchen table and the smell of something cooking, and all four of them in the same rooms, the ordinary noise and motion of it, the thing he hadn't known he was missing until it was already there. The dirt track appeared on his left. He drove past it tonight, he wasn't expected, and kept on toward Millbrook with both hands on the wheel and the mountains going dark against the sky, enormous and permanent and wholly indifferent to the small, complicated human things happening beneath them. Which was fine. He'd take indifferent. He'd take the mountain and the road and the August heat and all the difficulty that was headed his way, because it was coming regardless, and the only variable he controlled was whether he ran from it or stood still. He drove home. He was not running. Charlotte's lawyer was a woman named Diane Castillo, 51 years old, with an office in Billings, and the particular quality of stillness that Ethan associated with people who had spent decades listening to other people's worst situations without letting the weight of it alter their posture. She had short, gray-streaked hair and reading glasses she took on and off frequently, and a way of asking questions that made you feel like the question was simple, even when it wasn't. She met with Ethan on a Thursday morning in late August, in a conference room that smelled like printer ink and old carpet, and she spent 40 minutes asking him about the farmhouse. Not about Victor, not about the custody filing, about the farmhouse. Who fixed what, when, what conversations he'd had with Ava, what a typical evening looked like, whether he'd ever raised his voice, whether he'd ever been alone with Ava without Charlotte present, and for how long. He answered everything directly and without elaboration, which Diane seemed to appreciate. Victor's attorneys are going to characterize you as an undisclosed variable in the child's environment, she said at the end. They'll suggest Charlotte introduced an unknown adult male into Ava's life without appropriate disclosure to the co-parent. That's the angle. Is it a strong angle? Ethan asked. It would be stronger if you'd behaved badly. You haven't. She made a note. What they're going to rely on instead is implication, the idea that something improper might be occurring without being specific enough that Charlotte can refute a specific claim. She took off her glasses. It's a tactic. It works on juries that are inclined to worry. It's less effective on family court judges who've seen it before. What do you need from me? Your deposition. Honest answers, no embellishment. If they ask you how you feel about Charlotte, you tell the truth. If they ask how often you're at the farmhouse, you tell the truth. The truth is your best asset here. The facts of what's actually happened are not a problem. The narrative Victor's lawyers are going to try to construct is the problem, and the way to defeat a narrative is with facts that don't fit it. He drove back to Millbrook thinking about what Diane had said. The truth is your best asset. He'd lived his whole adult life on that premise without articulating it, the way you live on premises so foundational you don't notice them until someone names them. Charlotte called that evening while he was making dinner. How was she? She asked. Good. Smart. I can see why you trust her. Did she scare you? No. He stirred the pasta. She made me feel like the situation was manageable. I don't know if that's accurate or if she's just very good at making things feel manageable. Both, Charlotte said. With Diane, it's usually both. In the background, he could hear Ava explaining something at some length and volume.
He couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm was familiar, the escalating intensity of a child making a point she considers important. "What's she saying?" he asked. "She's explaining to the television that the nature documentary it's showing has the wolves' behavior wrong." Charlotte's voice had the flat effect she used when she was trying not to laugh. "She's been at it for about 4 minutes. Is she winning?" "The television hasn't conceded, but it seems rattled." He set the spoon down and leaned against the counter. Outside his kitchen window, the August evening was going that deep blue it went before full dark, the streetlight at the corner just starting to register. "Charlotte," he said. "Yeah, it's going to be okay." A pause. Not the pause of someone who disbelieved him. The pause of someone weighing how much to let themselves believe it. "Diane thinks we're in a reasonable position," Charlotte said. "Victor's filing is opportunistic. It doesn't have a lot of substance behind it. But opportunistic filings still take time and money, and—" She stopped. "And they're exhausting, regardless of how they resolve." "I know." He picked up the spoon again. "We'll get through the exhausting part." Another pause, then, "We," he said. He heard her breathe. "Okay," she said. "We." The deposition happened on a Friday in the first week of September, in a conference room in a law office in Billings with Victor's lead attorney, a man named Kerrigan, who had the smooth, unhurried manner of someone accustomed to being the most prepared person in any given room. Kerrigan was not the worst version of what Ethan had expected. He didn't try intimidation. He was too good for that. He tried something more sophisticated, a gradual reframing of every answer Ethan gave, small adjustments to how things were characterized, the kind of careful lawyering that tried to move the ground under your feet an inch at a time and see if you noticed. Ethan noticed. "You'd describe yourself as a fixture in Ms. Sterling's household," Kerrigan said. It was phrased as a question, but constructed as a statement. "I describe myself as someone who comes by regularly," Ethan said. "And how regular is regularly?" "Depends on the week, 2-3 times, sometimes more, sometimes less. And on these visits, you often stay for extended periods, evenings, dinners, occasionally overnight." "I've never stayed overnight," Ethan said. "That's not accurate." Kerrigan looked at his notes with the expression of a man making a small correction. "My apologies. Let me rephrase. You stay late into evenings." "Sometimes, yes. During these evenings, Ava Sterling is present. Usually. She goes to bed at 8, 8:30. Sometimes I stay after that, yes." "And in your time with Ava Sterling, have you ever represented yourself to her as a father figure?" Ethan looked at him. "No." "Has Ava ever referred to you in familial terms?" He thought about the dinner in June, Ava passing the bread, the word that had dropped out of her easily, naturally, without intent. He thought about Charlotte telling him later on the porch. He thought about what honesty required. "Once," he said. "She used the word dad once, in passing, at dinner. She was talking to me, asking me to pass something. I don't believe she planned it. I don't believe she's repeated it." Kerrigan made a note. "And how did Ms. Sterling respond?" "She didn't say anything in the moment. Neither did I." So the term was not corrected. A 6-year-old said a word at dinner. Correcting it would have made it a bigger thing than it was. Or, Kerrigan said pleasantly, it might indicate a degree of familiarity that Ms. Sterling has cultivated between you and her daughter without the co-parent's knowledge or consent. Ethan looked at him steadily. "That's a significant leap from a kid saying a word at dinner." "Perhaps," Kerrigan said. "Let's move on." The deposition lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. When it was done, Diane walked him out to the parking lot and said, "You did well. You didn't over-explain, you didn't get defensive, you corrected the inaccuracies without aggression. That's exactly what we needed." "The word," Ethan said. "The thing Ava said. Is that going to be a problem?" "It might be a footnote," Diane said. "It's not going to be a deciding factor. What it tells the court is that a child is comfortable with you, which is not evidence of wrongdoing." She put her glasses on. "What it tells Victor's lawyers is that they don't have much, Chut." September settled over the farmhouse like something earned. The raised beds had produced more tomatoes than Charlotte knew what to do with. She'd made sauce and frozen it, given jars to Ethan's mother, left a box on the Kowalski family's gate at the end of their road. Gerald the pumpkin was, against all odds, thriving, a fat orange thing that sat in its corner of the garden with the complacent dignity of something that knew it had been named. Ethan's business had its September surge, people remembering that winter was actually coming, furnaces needing servicing, the heating calls multiplying the way they always did in the first week of cooler weather. He was busy every day, and some evenings, and the times he made it out to the farmhouse were compressed and sometimes brief, but he made it out regardless, because the farmhouse had become a gravitational fact of his life, and he'd stopped pretending otherwise. The hearing was scheduled for October 14th. Charlotte's attorney had estimated it would take 1 day, possibly 2. Victor's legal team had submitted a package of supporting documents, photographs pulled from Charlotte's social media, a statement from Victor characterizing the situation at the farmhouse, and a declaration from a child psychologist they'd hired who had never met Ava and was opining theoretically on the potential effects of undisclosed adult relationships on children in post-divorce households. The psychologist's declaration was, Diane said, the weakest piece of their case, which was probably why they'd put it in. Charlotte's side had Ava's teacher, who had provided an unsolicited letter about Ava's stability, growth, and happiness since September of the previous year. Charlotte's CFO, Marcus, who had agreed to provide a statement about Charlotte's management of the company and the absence of any professional neglect during her remote work period. Ethan's deposition. The photographs from Ethan's phone of Victor's car arriving at the farmhouse, time-stamped and geotagged. And a statement from Victor's own household account records, which Diane had subpoenaed and which showed 3 separate large cash transfers in the 12 months following the divorce that Victor had not disclosed in the original proceedings. That last piece was not directly relevant to the custody question, but it spoke to character. Diane had a way of making character speak at the right moments. Ethan drove Charlotte to Billings on the morning of the 14th. She'd offered to drive herself. He'd said he was going regardless. As a witness, he had to be available, and that it made no sense for them to take separate cars, which was true and also not the full reason. The full reason was that he didn't want her walking into that building alone, and he wasn't sophisticated enough about the emotional dynamics involved to dress it up as anything other than what it was. She didn't argue. She'd stopped arguing with his presence months ago. The drive was an hour and 40 minutes. They talked about ordinary things for the first half. Derek's performance at work, Maya's recent obsession with a book series about a girl who could talk to animals, whether Gerald the pumpkin was going to be large enough for Ava's Halloween ambitions, which were, Charlotte said, extensive and structurally concerning. By the time they hit the Billings outskirts, the conversation had run down, and they drove the last 20 minutes mostly quiet, which was a comfortable quiet, the kind that didn't require filling. I used to be good at this, Charlotte said as they pulled into the parking structure near the courthouse. Going into rooms and making my case. I built a company on it. You're still good at it, Ethan said. I'm better when it's not about Ava. She looked at the parking structure's concrete wall. When it's about Ava, I feel like all the competence just goes somewhere. Like I can't trust my own read on anything. That's because it matters more than anything else. I know. She unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move to get out. I keep thinking about what he said. On the porch. That the conversation wasn't finished. She was quiet. He's going to sit in there today and look at me and use everything he knows about me to try to make me small. And he knows a lot. You know things about people after 4 years. Ethan turned off the engine. What does he know? She thought about it. That I second-guess myself when I'm tired. That I get formal when I'm scared. My vocabulary gets larger and my sentences get more careful. That I care too much what people think of me in rooms like that. She paused. He'll try to use all of it. Then don't be tired, Ethan said. You slept last night? Mostly. You had breakfast? Coffee. Charlotte. I know. I wasn't hungry. He looked at her. She looked back. There was something in her face, but not fear exactly. The thing underneath fear, the more honest thing that fear sits on top of. You're going to walk in there, he said, and you're going to tell the truth about the farmhouse and about Ava and about what you've built in the last 18 months. And the truth is, it's a good truth. It's a good life you've built. He held her look. He can sit across the room and know things about you from 4 years ago. He doesn't know you now. I do. And what I know is that you're exactly the right person to walk into that room." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said, not the automatic okay she used to buy time. The other one. They got out of the car. But the courtroom was smaller than Ethan had expected. Not a grand theatrical space, but a working room, fluorescent lights, wood paneling that had been repainted at least once, a judge's bench that elevated the proceedings without dramatizing them. Judge Patricia Huang was 60, small, with an expression that conveyed she had heard every argument currently available to humanity and was not going to be impressed by delivery, only by substance. Victor sat at the plaintiff's table with Kerrigan and a second attorney Ethan hadn't met. He was in a suit that cost more than Ethan's truck, and he had the self-possession of a man who believed he was going to win. He looked at Charlotte when she came in. He didn't look at Ethan. Diane had coached Charlotte on the stand, but Charlotte didn't sound coached. She sounded like Charlotte, precise and direct, and occasionally more formal than necessary, which was the thing she'd identified about herself, her fear vocabulary kicking in. But Diane had told her it read as professional in a courtroom context rather than defensive. When Kerrigan cross-examined her, he used the approach he'd used with Ethan, gradual reframing, small pushes on characterization, the implication of things not stated. Charlotte pushed back every time, politely and with specifics. When Kerrigan suggested her remote work arrangement indicated divided attention, she cited 6 consecutive quarters of company growth and an employee retention rate that ranked in the top 15% of her industry sector. When he implied that Ethan's presence was disruptive to Ava's routine, she described the routine in precise and affectionate detail: school, the farmhouse, the Fox City, dinner, bedtime. And the routine was so evidently stable and so evidently built around Ava's needs that the implication collapsed under its own weight. The child psychologist Victor's team had hired testified for 40 minutes. Diane's cross-examination lasted 12 minutes, during which she established that the psychologist had not met Ava, had not visited the farmhouse, had not reviewed Ava's school records, and was drawing conclusions from a theoretical framework applied to a specific situation without the specific information required to apply it. The psychologist agreed with each of these points, politely and with increasing discomfort. Ethan testified in the early afternoon. He said what was true. He was a heating and repair contractor who had been called to the farmhouse in January during a blizzard, had subsequently developed a relationship with Charlotte Sterling and her daughter, spent regular time at the farmhouse, and considered both of them important to his life and to his daughter's life. He said he had never witnessed Charlotte behave in any way that was not in Ava's best interest. He said that Ava was, in his observation, a happy and grounded child who was thriving in her school and in her home. Kerrigan's cross-examination lasted longer than Ethan expected, about 25 minutes, and focused primarily on the pace of his integration into the household. Ethan answered everything the same way he'd answered everything in the deposition, directly, without elaboration, correcting inaccuracies when they appeared. At one point, Kerrigan asked, "Would you characterize your relationship with Ms. Sterling as serious?" Ethan looked at him. "Yes." "And how long has it been serious?" "A while." "Can you be more specific?" Ethan thought about it honestly, about the January blizzard and the utility room and the January to April accumulation of something he hadn't been looking for. "I'd say it became serious around April, but looking back at it, probably January." "So within months of meeting Ms. Sterling, you had established yourself as a regular presence in her home and in her daughter's life." "I established myself as someone she trusted," Ethan said, which is not the same characterization. "And in your view, that's—" "In my view," Ethan said, "a single parent finding someone she trusts and that person spending time with her family is not a problem. It's how things are supposed to work." Judge Huang made a small note. Kerrigan moved on. Marcus testified via video, professional and unflappable, and dismantled the professional neglect angle with quarterly numbers and a deadpan precision that Ethan admired. Ava's teacher, Ms. Feldman, testified in person and said things about Ava's development and happiness that made Charlotte sit very still in her seat, looking at the table, working visibly to hold her expression together. The surprise was Victor's own testimony. Kerrigan had clearly prepared him, But Victor had the fundamental problem of being Victor, a man who performed reasonableness adequately in low-stakes situations and began to show its seams under pressure. When Diane cross-examined him, she moved methodically. The phone calls to Marcus, the August visit to the farmhouse, the blood alcohol question that Ethan's time-stamped photographs now made directly relevant, the financial transfers that had nothing to do with the custody question and everything to do with who this man was when he thought no one was looking. Victor's composure held for the first 20 minutes. Then Diane asked, quietly and without preamble, about a text message he had sent to Ava's phone during the July custody period. A text that said, in full, "Tell me what the repairman's name is. Has Mom mentioned him?" The courtroom was quiet. Victor said it was a casual question. Diane said she understood and handed the transcript to the judge and said nothing further about it because she didn't have to. Judge Huang delivered her ruling the following morning. Ethan and Charlotte sat side by side in the gallery while Diane stood at the plaintiff's table and Judge Huang read from her written decision in the particular measured cadence of someone who has weighed a thing carefully and is now delivering the weight. The motion to modify custody was denied. Charlotte would retain primary custody. Victor would retain his 12 days in July and the alternating holiday arrangement. However, the judge noted for the record that using a minor child as a conduit for information gathering about the other parent's personal life was contrary to the child's best interest and would be considered a material factor in any future custody proceedings. Victor's supervised visitation request, a counterpetition Charlotte's lawyers had filed in response to the August farmhouse incident, was granted. For the next 6 months, Victor's visits outside of the primary July arrangement would require a neutral third-party supervisor. Charlotte sat perfectly still through all of it. When Judge Huang finished and closed the folder and the room began to move again, Charlotte put her hand over her mouth and pressed hard, and her eyes went bright, and she did not cry in the courtroom because she had too much control for that, but she came very close. Ethan put his hand on her back. Just that. She leaned into it by about an inch and held the inch for a long moment and then sat up straight. "Okay," she said, to herself, mostly. "Okay." In the parking structure afterward, away from the lawyers and the courthouse hallways and the formal proceedings of it all, Charlotte finally let some of it go. Not dramatically, she wasn't built for dramatic, but she stood by the passenger door of Ethan's truck and pressed her back against it and tilted her head back and exhaled the way people exhale when they've been holding something for a very long time and have finally been given permission to set it down. He stood in front of her and waited. 2 years, she said, of being afraid he'd do something like this. Always in the back. Always. She lowered her head and looked at him. Her eyes were still bright. "And now there's a court record. He used our daughter to spy on me, and there's a court record of it." "There is," Ethan said. Diane was excellent. She was. Charlotte pushed off the car door and stood straight. "You were excellent. I told the truth. That's not a skill. It's just what happened." Charlotte looked at him for a moment with the full weight of her attention, the way she had that first night in the utility room, reading the situation, finding its actual edges. "You drove to Billings," she said. "You sat in a deposition. You got on a stand in front of a judge and said out loud that we matter to you. You do matter to me." "I know." She reached up and put her hand on his face, just for a second, her palm against his jaw, and then took it back and picked up her bag and said, "Take me home." He took her home. The drive back was different from the drive out, looser, the compressed quality of the morning gone. They stopped 40 minutes south of Billings at a diner that was the kind of place where the coffee came automatically, and the pie was better than it had any right to be, and they sat in a booth by the window and ate lunch at 2:30 in the afternoon with the October light coming flat across the plains. Charlotte ordered pie. So did Ethan. Neither of them mentioned the courthouse. They talked about Maya's animal communication book series, which had apparently entered a new phase involving a horse, and about Gerald the Pumpkin's Halloween potential, and about a section of fencing on the north end of the property that Ethan had been meaning to get to before the freeze. "November," Charlotte said. "Before the ground's hard." "That's what I was thinking." She ate the pie. He ate the pie. The diner hummed with the low-key activity of a Tuesday afternoon in October.
Two old men at the counter, a woman with a toddler in the back booth, the cook's radio audible through the kitchen window, something country that neither of them knew. "I owe you an apology," Charlotte said. He looked up. "In August, when you said it wasn't just me anymore, I said okay like it was a logistical arrangement, something practical." She looked at her plate. "It wasn't just practical. I knew it wasn't. I was scared to say that out loud." "You don't owe me anything for that," he said. "I want to say it anyway." She looked at him. "It's not just practical, you being in our life. It matters. You matter. In the way that I'm not good at saying directly because—" She stopped. "Because the last time I was direct about that kind of thing, it was used against me. And I'm still learning not to wait for the other shoe." The diner hummed. The October light lay flat across their table. Ethan looked at Charlotte, who was watching him with that particular directness she had. The directness she'd had since the very first night, the "I want to understand what's wrong" that had been the first true thing she'd said to him. "There's no other shoe," he said. She breathed. "I know," she said. "I'm learning to know it." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, briefly, the way you anchor something that's been moving. She didn't pull back. They finished the pie. They paid the check. They drove the rest of the way back to Millbrook as the October afternoon turned to early evening, the sky going that impossible pink to purple gradient it did over the Montana plains when the conditions were right, the kind of sky that made you grateful for bad weather, because bad weather was the price of the good light. When they turned off Route 9 onto the dirt track, the farmhouse was lit up in the early dark. His mother had brought Maya and Ava back at 4, as arranged, and every light on the main floor was burning. From the car, even before they stopped, they could see two small silhouettes in the front window, moving around with the purposeful energy of children who had been waiting. Charlotte looked at the house for a moment before she got out. At the lit windows, the two moving silhouettes, the smoke from the chimney that meant someone had figured out the fireplace. Probably Maya, who had figured it out before Charlotte did, and been unreasonably proud of herself about it. "Look at that," Charlotte said. He looked. "Yeah," he said. She got out of the car. The front door opened before she reached the steps. Ava, in fox pajamas, despite the fact that it was not yet 6 o'clock, and she had already made them her permanent uniform. And she came down the steps at speed, Clover the rabbit in one arm, and hit Charlotte at waist height with the full velocity of a 6-year-old who has been waiting all day and is done waiting. Charlotte caught her, both arms, lifted her, and held on. Over Charlotte's shoulder, Ava looked at Ethan. "Did you win?" she asked. He climbed the porch steps. Maya appeared in the doorway behind Ava's vacated space, book in hand, marking her page with her thumb. "Yeah," Ethan said. "We won." Ava's face did the thing it did. The full-body satisfaction of a child receiving news she'd expected but needed confirmed. Then she turned back to her mother and said, "Gerald needs to come inside tonight. It's cold." "Pumpkins live outside, Bug." "Gerald is sensitive to cold." "Gerald is a pumpkin." "Gerald is our pumpkin." Ethan stepped past them into the warmth of the house, where the fireplace was going and the kitchen smelled like the soup his mother had apparently left on the stove. She'd texted him about it, practical and warm the way she was about most things. And Maya immediately fell into step beside him as he moved toward the kitchen, telling him about the book, about the horse, about a subplot he hadn't heard yet that she considered the most important development in recent literary history. He listened. He stirred the soup. Behind him, through the open front door, he could hear Charlotte and Ava on the porch, negotiating the terms of Gerald's winter arrangements with the gravity the situation apparently demanded. The farmhouse settled around all of them. The fire, the soup, the ongoing pumpkin diplomacy on the porch, Maya's running commentary, the solid weight of the October evening outside the windows, the particular warmth of a house that had become a home without anybody declaring it so, without ceremony or announcement, just by the accumulation of ordinary things and the people who had showed up for them. He thought about January, the blizzard, the 18-mile drive in the dark, the furnace and the utility room, and a woman standing in the doorway who'd said, "I want to understand what's wrong," and meant it about everything, not just the furnace. He hadn't known that night what he was driving toward.
He told himself he was driving toward a job, but maybe that was just the version of the story that fit in the truck cab, small enough to hold, on the way to something too large to see clearly until you were already in the middle of it. He set 2 bowls on the table, then 2 more. Charlotte came in from the porch with Ava on her hip, the door closing behind her against the October cold, and she looked at the table. 4 bowls, the soup, the fireplace giving its warmth to the whole room, and she looked at him with an expression that was tired and relieved, and something else he'd stopped trying to name months ago because names made things smaller than they were. "Soup's ready," he said. "I see that," she said. She set Ava down. Ava went immediately to Maya and launched into the Gerald situation, which required Maya's opinion as a matter of urgency. Charlotte crossed the kitchen and stood next to Ethan at the counter and looked at the bowls he'd set out, 4 of them, arranged without thought in the way you arrange things for the number of people who were going to the table. She picked up a spoon. 4 bowls, she said. 4 people, he said. She looked at him, and the thing in her expression was simple when you knew it. It was the look of someone who had been afraid for a very long time and had decided, carefully and not without effort, to stop being afraid of this particular thing. "Yeah," she said. 4 people. Gerald survived Halloween. This was not a foregone conclusion. Ava had designed ambitions for the pumpkin that exceeded what most structural engineers would have considered responsible. A carved face with 17 distinct features, including eyebrows, which Ethan had to explain were technically possible but would compromise the forehead integrity. They'd negotiated it down to 12 features. Gerald sat on the porch through the last week of October with his 12-featured face lit from inside by a battery candle because Ava had concerns about open flame near Gerald's emotional state, which was a sentence that Ethan had let pass without comment. November arrived with the cold that meant business. Not the tentative cold of October, which still carried traces of summer's memory in the afternoon hours, but the real Montana cold, the kind that came down from the north with the wind behind it and didn't apologize. Ethan replaced the section of north fence before the ground hardened, as he and Charlotte had planned at the diner in October, working 2 mornings across a week with Derek, helping on the second day because the post holes needed more hands than one. Derek had figured out the situation at the farmhouse within about 40 minutes of his first visit, which Ethan credited to Derek being 26 and perceptive in the specific way that young people were perceptive about things their employers wished they weren't. He hadn't said anything about it, which Ethan credited to Derek being professionally sensible. Charlotte had given Derek coffee and asked him straightforward questions about his training and his opinions on the fence's long-term viability, and Derek had answered them straightforwardly, and by the end of the second morning he was eating lunch at the farmhouse kitchen table like he'd been doing it for months. "He's good," Charlotte told Ethan afterward. "He's slow," Ethan said. "But he's thorough." "Slow and thorough is better than fast and wrong. That's what I keep telling myself." The fence went in right. It would hold through the winter and then some. The custody arrangement settled into its new shape. Victor filed no further motions in November. His lawyer sent 1 letter in early December through the appropriate channels, requesting confirmation of his Christmas visitation dates, which Diane handled and which was processed without incident. Charlotte told Ethan about the letter at dinner, matter-of-factly, and they moved on to other topics, and that was what it was like now. Victor existed at the edges of their life the way a cold draft existed at the edges of a well-insulated house, present enough to know it was there, not enough to matter in the rooms where they actually lived. Ava's supervised visit with Victor in November lasted 3 hours at a neutral location and was, by Ava's account, fine. She used the word with the particular compression of a 7-year-old who has decided not to volunteer more than asked. Charlotte didn't press. Ethan watched the 2 of them at dinner that evening. Ava quieter than usual, Charlotte tracking it without visibly tracking it, the 2 of them in the specific attunement of a mother and daughter who had been each other's primary person through something difficult and had built a language for it that didn't require words. He was washing up at the sink when Ava appeared beside him and picked up a dish towel without being asked and started drying. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. She dried a bowl with more concentration than the bowl required. He asked if I liked living at the farmhouse. "What did you say?" I said yes. She set the bowl down carefully. He asked if I liked you. Ethan kept washing. What did you say? Ava looked up at him with the direct, unfiltered seriousness she'd had since the first night in the utility room doorway, fox pajamas, Clover under one arm. I said you were the person who fixed everything, she said, and that you stayed. He turned the faucet off. He didn't say anything after that, Ava said. She picked up another dish. I think he didn't know what to say. Ethan thought Victor probably didn't. A man who ran on leverage and implication didn't have a ready response for a 7-year-old's simple truth. You fixed everything, and you stayed. There was no angle to work in that, no subtext to reframe. It was just what it was. You did good, Ethan said. Ava considered this. I know, she said, without arrogance, just accuracy, and went back to drying dishes. December brought snow and Christmas lights along Millbrook's main street and Maya's school pageant, which she'd been preparing for since October, with an intensity of focus that Ethan had chosen not to undermine by pointing out it was a 20-minute event for an audience of parents in folding chairs. She had a speaking part, 3 lines, and she delivered them to Ethan, to his mother, to Charlotte, and to Ava no fewer than 30 times in aggregate. By the night of the pageant, Ava had memorized Maya's lines better than Maya had. They sat in the folding chairs together, Ethan, Charlotte, Ava, and his mother, who had brought cookies in a tin and distributed them to the family in the row ahead as well, because she was that way. His mother had taken to Charlotte the way she took to most things she approved of, without announcement or ceremony, just by treating her as a given. She'd asked Charlotte's opinion on a recipe in October, and Charlotte had given it honestly, and that had apparently been the relevant test. Maya delivered her 3 lines without error and with a commitment that the material probably didn't require. Ava clapped louder than anyone in the gymnasium. Charlotte's hand found Ethan's in the dark between the chairs, briefly, and then let go, and he sat with the warmth of that brief contact through the rest of the pageant. Afterward, at his mother's kitchen table with the cookie tin open and the kids on the living room floor, with something that involved a lot of pieces, his mother looked across the table at Charlotte and said, You're staying through Christmas? Charlotte glanced at Ethan. That's the plan. His mother nodded. Good. She said it the way she said things she'd already decided, as a closing statement, not an opening. I'll do Christmas dinner at mine. Everyone. Charlotte opened her mouth. Don't argue, his mother said pleasantly. I've been cooking Christmas dinner for 22 years. One more setting is not a hardship. Charlotte looked at Ethan. He shrugged, which was his honest contribution to the negotiation. Okay, Charlotte said. Thank you. You can bring the pie, his mother said. I've heard you make good pie. I make adequate pie, Charlotte said. I want to be accurate about this. His mother looked at her for a moment and then smiled. The real one, the one she saved. I like you, she said simply, and went to refill the kettle. Charlotte looked at Ethan with an expression he recognized, the slightly dazed quality of someone who had been accepted by someone important and wasn't entirely sure they'd seen it coming. She likes you, he confirmed. I gathered. She doesn't say it to everyone. I gathered that too, Charlotte said, and she looked at this kitchen, the cookie tin, the kettle, the sound of the kids from the living room, the Christmas lights his mother had strung along the window frames in the same pattern she'd used every year since he could remember. And her expression was the one it had become over the course of this year. Settled. Not without effort, not without the history of what it had cost her to get here, but settled. Like someone who had finally stopped calculating the distance to the exit. January came back around, and with it the anniversary of the blizzard, which neither of them mentioned to each other because neither of them needed to. It had been a year. The furnace ran without complaint. The north fence stood straight in the frozen ground. Gerald's remains had been composted in November, a ceremony Ava had presided over with appropriate gravity and which had apparently included a short speech that Charlotte had not been invited to hear. The raised beds were dormant under their layer of mulch, the tomato cages stored in the barn, a seed catalog on the kitchen table with pages folded down. Ethan had been thinking about something since October. He'd been thinking about it in the way he thought about things he knew were true, but wasn't ready to say yet. Not suppressing it, just letting it exist in him until it had enough shape to put into words. He was not a man who spoke before he was sure, He'd learned that about himself the hard way, over years of saying things half-formed and then having to unsay them. He was sure now. He thought about how to do it. He thought about it with the same practical seriousness he brought to any job that mattered. What was the right setting, the right moment, the right version of it that would be true to who they were rather than a performance of what proposal scenes were supposed to look like? He didn't want a restaurant with a ring and a dessert. He didn't want an audience. He didn't want anything scripted. What he knew was the farmhouse, the porch, the late afternoon light in January that came flat and cold across the fields. What he knew was Charlotte in her flannel shirt with her coffee going cold while she watched the tree line. What he knew was what they'd built together, imperfectly and without a plan, the way real things got built. He'd bought the ring in Billings in December from a jeweler who'd asked what she was like, and he'd said, straightforward, not flashy, doesn't like things that make promises they can't keep. The jeweler had shown him a simple band with a single oval stone, nothing theatrical, nothing that tried too hard, and he'd looked at it and thought, yes, that's the right version. He carried it in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks, which was longer than he'd intended, but January was busy with heating calls and the ring was there, and the right moment was a thing you felt rather than scheduled. He knew the right moment would come, and he knew he'd recognize it, and he didn't force it. It came on a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week of January. The girls were doing homework at the kitchen table, Maya working through a math worksheet with the focused misery of someone who found math personally offensive, Ava drawing pictures of animals for a school project with the serene industry of someone who had found the assignment perfectly suited to her skills. Charlotte was at the counter making dinner, and Ethan was at the table supposedly helping Maya with the math, which mostly meant sitting beside her and not looking too satisfied when she got the answers herself. 9 times 7, Maya said. What do you think? Ethan said. I think I hate 9. 9 times 7. She looked at the ceiling. 63. There you go. I still hate 9. Ava, without looking up from her drawing. 9 is a perfectly acceptable number. Ava, Maya said, you like numbers. I like all numbers equally, Ava said serenely. It would be unfair to have favorites. Maya looked at Ethan with the expression of someone appealing to authority. He kept his face neutral. Charlotte, at the counter, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was ordinary. It was a Wednesday evening in January, homework and dinner preparation and a 7-year-old's principled defense of numerical equality. It was, in the most literal sense, nothing remarkable. It was everything. He looked at Charlotte at the counter, her back to him, one hand stirring, the other holding her phone to check something. And he thought, this is the moment. Not because it was cinematic, because it was real. Because this was the actual texture of the life he wanted, right here in this kitchen on a Wednesday, and waiting for a more theatrical version of it would be missing the point entirely. Hey, he said. Charlotte turned. Yeah? He looked at the kids. Can you two give us a minute? Maya looked up from the worksheet with immediate suspicion. Ava looked up from the animals. They looked at each other. The specific wordless communication of 2 children who have spent enough time together to have developed a shared language, and something passed between them that Ethan couldn't fully read, but that seemed to contain and finally an approximately equal measure. We'll go look at the seeds, Ava said. She gathered her drawings, Maya gathered her worksheet, and they disappeared toward the living room with a speed that suggested they had been prepared for this possibility. Charlotte watched them go. Then she turned back to Ethan with her arms crossed, and the look she wore when she was figuring out the shape of a situation. What's happening? She said. He stood up from the table. He put his hand in his jacket pocket. I've been carrying this since December, he said. I kept waiting for the right moment, and then I realized the right moment was probably just any moment that was true. And this is a true moment. He took the ring out of the pocket. So, Charlotte looked at the ring, then at him. Her arms slowly uncrossed. Ethan, she said. I'm not good at long speeches, he said. You know that. I'll just say what's true. He held the ring, not performing the gesture, just holding it. A year ago, I drove 18 miles in a blizzard because a woman I'd never met said she had a 6-year-old daughter with her, and I couldn't not go.
I didn't know what I was driving toward. I thought I was driving toward a broken furnace. He paused. I was wrong about that. Charlotte's eyes had gone bright in the way they'd gone bright in the courthouse hallway, the way she went bright when she was holding something very large and trying not to drop it. I want to stay, he said. Not for another night, not as a practical arrangement. I want to marry you. I want this. He looked at the kitchen, the homework on the table, the dinner on the stove, the sound of the girls in the other room. I want this to be the thing, the actual thing.
If you want that too. Charlotte stood very still for a moment. In the living room, there was the complete absence of the sound of two children who were very definitely listening. You are the least dramatic person I have ever met, Charlotte said. Her voice was unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with criticism. I know, he said. Is that a yes? She crossed the kitchen and took his face in both hands, the way she'd done once on the porch, briefly, and then taken back, except this time she didn't take it back. Yes, she said. That is absolutely a yes. From the living room, Ava's voice, at full volume and with no pretense of having not been listening. I knew it. Maya slightly more restrained. Ava, we weren't supposed to. I knew it in February, Ava announced, apparently to the room at large. When he stayed for grilled cheese. Charlotte was laughing now, forehead against Ethan's, the ring still in his hand between them, and he was laughing too, and he slid the ring onto her finger without ceremony while she was still laughing, which was probably the most accurate version of how it should have happened. The girls came back into the kitchen. Ava examined the ring with the seriousness of someone conducting a formal appraisal. Maya stood at Ethan's elbow and looked at Charlotte with an expression he recognized from when Maya encountered something she'd hoped for but hadn't let herself fully expect. Does this mean we're all going to live here? Maya asked. We're going to figure that out, Ethan said. I vote yes, Ava said. We can put the Fox City in your room, Maya. The Fox City is in the yard. We can make an indoor Fox City for winter. Girls, Charlotte said, still laughing. Let us have approximately 3 minutes. 3 minutes, Ava confirmed, and went back to her animals. They figured it out, as promised, which took the better part of February and was not always simple. Ethan's house in Millbrook sold in March to a young couple who'd moved to town for work, and he was glad for that. Glad it went to people who would fill it with the noise of a life being built, rather than the quiet of one that had contracted around its losses. He moved to the farmhouse in stages, the way practical people move. Boxes on weekends, the larger furniture when Derek was available to help, a truck bed of tools that found their home in the barn alongside the chest freezer and the ancient tractor and the ghost of the cardboard tube that had become the Fox City's tunnel. His mother came out to the farmhouse for Sunday dinners through the spring, a habit that began without announcement and simply continued. She brought her cookie tin. She sat at the big farmhouse table and talked to Charlotte about the seed catalog, and asked Ava opinionated questions about her drawings, and told Maya things about Ethan's childhood that he would have preferred remained confidential. Charlotte listened to all of it with the specific delight of someone receiving information they hadn't known they needed. You cried at a movie, his mother told Charlotte one March Sunday. He was 31. He would like me not to mention this. Which movie? Charlotte asked. The animated one, with the dog. I didn't cry, Ethan said. He cried, his mother said. It was very moving. The dog was very loyal. Charlotte looked at him across the table with an expression of pure affection that she wasn't trying to conceal. He looked at his soup. The dog was very loyal, he said. Charlotte reached under the table and put her hand briefly on his knee, and he looked at her, and she was smiling, and his mother was talking about the dog, and Maya and Ava were arguing cheerfully about something involving the Fox City's spring expansion, and the farmhouse was doing what it had been doing all year, holding them. The wedding happened in September on a Saturday in the field behind the farmhouse. They'd talked about doing something larger. Charlotte's board had assumed something in Seattle, something commensurate with a CEO and the kind of professional life that called for visible celebration. Ethan had assumed he didn't care either way, and then discovered, when Charlotte asked him directly, that he actually did care. He wanted the field. He wanted the farmhouse behind them, and the mountains in the distance, and the people who had actually been there for the year it had taken to get here. Charlotte had said, "The field it is." It was not a flawless day. The weather was cooperative until about an hour before the ceremony, when a cloud system moved through and dropped 20 minutes of light rain that nobody had predicted, and that soaked the chairs they'd set up in the field and required a rapid reorganization onto the covered side porch and the adjacent yard, which Ethan and Derek handled while Charlotte stood on the porch in her dress, watching them work with the expression she'd had that first night in the utility room. Present, assessing, trusting the process without being hands-off about it. "Do you need—" she started. "We've got it," Ethan said. "Stay there. Don't get the dress wet." "The dress is fine." "Charlotte." "I'm staying," she said, and stayed, and watched them move 20 chairs in 12 minutes, which was one of those things that happened when you put two capable people on a physical problem. The rain passed. The sun came back in the way Montana sun came back after a quick rain, abrupt and unqualified, like it had never been gone. The chairs dried faster than expected in the September breeze. The field had that smell it had after rain, grass, and earth, and something else, something clean, and the mountains in the distance were sharp the way they got when the air had been washed. They married at 5 o'clock with the late afternoon light on everything. Diane was there, sorry. Charlotte had invited her, and Diane had come, and sat in the front row with her glasses on her head and a look of professional satisfaction that she didn't try to conceal. Marcus was there from Sterling Tech with his wife, and he cried, which surprised everyone, including Marcus. Derek was there. Ethan's mother was there in the chair she'd claimed with absolute authority at the end of the front row, her cookie tin on the empty chair beside her because she'd brought it for afterward, which was either eccentric or completely practical depending on how you looked at it. Ava and Maya were the people who mattered most to have there. And they were there, Ava in a dress she had agreed to wear only after extended consultation about its structural properties, Maya in the same dress in a different color, which had been their joint decision and about which neither of them had asked any adult's input. They stood at the front with the casual self-possession of children who understood that this moment was important without needing to perform their understanding of it. The ceremony was short because neither of them had ever wanted a long one. The officiant, a civil celebrant from Billings, who Charlotte had found and vetted with her characteristic thoroughness, moved through the formal structure efficiently and without flourish. When it came time for the vows, they'd written their own, which Ethan had found more difficult than he'd expected. He'd written 3 different versions before landing on the one he used, which was the shortest of the 3. "I drove through a blizzard to fix your furnace," he said, "and I've been trying to fix things for you ever since. But somewhere in the fence posts and the porch steps and the draft inducer motor, I figured out that you weren't broken. You never were. You just needed someone to stay. So that's what I'm promising. I'm going to stay. Through whatever comes. I'm not going anywhere." Charlotte had written more than Ethan because she processed things through language in a way that he didn't, and she'd revised hers more times than she'd told him, and when she delivered it, her voice stayed steady through most of it, and fractured slightly at the end, which she'd predicted and apologized in advance for, which he'd told her was unnecessary, which she'd told him she knew but was apologizing anyway. "I spent a long time building walls," she said, "and calling them boundaries, and telling myself they were the same thing." She looked at him. "You never asked me to take them down. You just waited on the other side of them until I figured out the difference. I don't know if I ever said thank you for that. So, thank you. For the patience I didn't deserve and the presence I came to rely on and the fact that you drove 18 miles in a blizzard because a stranger said she had a 6-year-old. She paused. "I love you. I have for a while. I was just scared to say it at the volume it deserved." In the front row, his mother pressed her hand briefly to her mouth and then straightened up and folded her hands in her lap as if she hadn't. When it was done, Ava said, clearly and without ceremony, into the post-ceremony quiet, "Can we have the cookies now?" His mother opened the tin. Hot. The reception was in the farmhouse and the field both, the folding tables spread between them, lanterns strung from the porch railing to the fence post in a line that looked like a decision but had actually been an accident of what they had available and where the extension cord reached. The food was a combination of catered things from a place in Billings and things people had brought because that was what happened when the guest list was people who actually knew you. Marcus's wife had brought a dish she described as a family obligation, non-negotiable. And Diane had brought wine she selected with the same methodical research she applied to everything. And Ethan's mother had 3 different kinds of cookies, the origin of the third variety remaining unexplained. The evening was warm for September, as if the month was making a final argument for itself before giving way to fall. The mountains held their light longer than the valley did, going pink and then amber and then the deep gray blue that meant the day was genuinely done. Lanterns came on. People moved between the field and the porch and the kitchen with the unhurried quality of people who had nowhere else to be. Ethan found Charlotte at the edge of the field at some point in the evening. He'd lost track of time, which didn't happen to him often, standing with a glass of wine and looking out at the dark where the tree line was. He came to stand beside her. "You okay?" he asked. "Better than okay," she said. She leaned against his shoulder, fully, not briefly. "I was just thinking about January, last January." "The furnace," he said. "The furnace." She looked at the dark. "I called 4 companies. All of them said no. And then I found your number on that county listing, and I almost didn't call because I was embarrassed to need help. I'd been working so hard at not needing help that asking for it felt like a defeat. You called, though." "I called because Ava was cold." She was quiet for a moment. "Everything after that is because Ava was cold." He put his arm around her. She leaned in. "Not everything," he said. "You opened the door before I knocked." Charlotte was quiet, remembering. "I heard your truck," she said. "I'd been watching for headlights for an hour. When I finally saw them, I couldn't wait." She looked up at him. 30 seconds. I couldn't wait 30 more seconds." "I noticed," he said. Was that obvious?" "A little." She made a sound that was equal parts laugh and embarrassment. "I was so tired that night. I'd been holding everything together since we moved here, and it had been 4 months, and the furnace went out, and I just—" She stopped. "You showed up, and you didn't make it weird. You just came in and looked at the problem." "That's the job," he said. "No." She turned to look at him directly. "That's you. That's who you are. You looked at the problem and you fixed it, and you didn't make me feel helpless for having needed it fixed." She paused. "Do you know how rare that is?" He didn't answer. He pulled her slightly closer and she let him, and they stood at the edge of the field with the party going on behind them. The voices, the lantern light, the sound of Ava explaining something to Derek with characteristic conviction, the sound of Maya laughing at something his mother had said. And they stood in the September dark and looked at the mountains they couldn't quite see anymore, but knew were there. Later that night, after the last guests had left and the farmhouse was full of the particular mess that meant a good evening had happened, after Maya and Ava had both fallen asleep in Ava's room, still in their dresses, because neither of them had made it to the changing point, after the kitchen was partly cleaned and partly left for morning, Charlotte and Ethan sat on the porch that he had rebuilt in the spring. The night was clear the way September nights got clear after dark. Cold coming in at the edges, stars the way Montana did stars. The silence of the fields all around. They had blankets. They had what was left of Diane's wine. They had the specific exhaustion of a day that had held a lot. "I want to tell you something," Charlotte said. "Okay." "Before you came along, before January, I'd made a decision." She wrapped both hands around her wine glass. "I decided that I was done with that kind of thing, with trying to build something with someone. I told myself the story where Ava and I were enough, and the company was enough, and the farmhouse was enough, and I didn't need—" She stopped. "I was very convincing, to myself, about how I didn't need any of this." He waited. "And then you showed up in a blizzard," she said. "And you fixed the furnace, and you came back to check on it, and you fixed the steps and the faucet and the gutter and the fence and the floors and the porch, and somewhere in all that fixing you made it impossible to keep telling myself the story." She looked at him. "You were too real, too consistently, stubbornly real.
You didn't perform anything. You didn't try to be what you thought I needed. You just showed up as exactly what you were every single time until I ran out of reasons to keep the walls up. Ethan thought about this. He thought about the version of himself that had gotten into the truck on that January night. The version that was running a 2-truck business that had become a 1-truck business, that was eating cereal for dinner and watching television he wasn't watching, that had built a life around the shape of what was gone and called the shape sufficient. I wasn't doing any better, he said. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't out there being nobly whole. I was getting through. I was raising Maya and running the business and not feeling much for most of it. And then you called and I drove out because a woman I'd never met had a kid who was cold, and he looked at the field. I didn't know I was also driving toward something I needed. I thought I was just doing the job. We were both pretending we were fine, Charlotte said. We were both very convincing, he agreed. She leaned her head against his shoulder. The stars were out in full force now, the Milky Way visible in the way it was only visible far from city light, that dense spill across the dark that made the universe feel less abstract and more like a fact you were physically inside. Ethan, she said. Yeah, I'm not pretending anymore. He turned his head to look at her. She was looking at the stars. Neither am I, he said. They sat on the porch he'd rebuilt until the cold came in enough that the blankets weren't sufficient, and then they went inside, and the farmhouse settled around them the way it had settled around all of them since January, solid and imperfect and real. The floors with their specific creaks, the furnace doing its reliable work, the second stair from the bottom that he'd reinforced in the spring creaking anyway, because that's what old houses did. They kept their character regardless of what you fixed. Upstairs in Ava's room, 2 girls slept in their dresses. One of them had Clover the rabbit under her chin. One of them had a book she'd been reading before sleep took over. Both of them had the uncomplicated abandon of children who were safe, who trusted the house around them, who had gone to sleep certain of where they'd wake up. He thought about what Ava had told him, standing at the sink with the dish towel. You fixed everything, and you stayed. He'd been thinking about it since November, turning it over. He wasn't sure Ava had meant it as profound. She was 7, and she was describing what she'd observed, simply and accurately, the way she described everything. But it had stayed with him because it was true, and because truth had a way of lasting. The thing about staying, the thing he understood now in a way he hadn't in January, when he'd thought of himself as someone who'd stopped expecting things, was that it wasn't a single decision. It looked like one from the outside, the way a house looked like a single thing from the road. But inside it was 1,000 smaller decisions, made again every day, the accumulated weight of choosing the same thing over and over in different weathers. He'd stayed through the blizzard and through the spring and through Victor and the courthouse and the October hearing and the winter that followed. He'd stay through whatever came next because the staying was the thing, not the dramatic entry or the grand gesture or the moment you could point to, the staying. He knew something else, too, that he hadn't known to look for when the year began. He knew that the story he'd been telling himself, that the life he'd had before was the thing, and the life since was the remainder, had been wrong. He'd thought of himself as a man in repair, someone putting himself back together after something had broken. He hadn't understood that repair wasn't a temporary state, that putting things back together was just life, the ongoing work of it. The furnace that ran well and then needed its draft inducer replaced and then ran well again. The fence that stood straight until a winter pushed it and needed new posts. The porch step that held your weight for years and then one day didn't and needed a new stringer. Nothing stayed fixed forever. That wasn't failure. That was just the nature of things that were genuinely in use. Charlotte fell asleep before he did, in the farmhouse bedroom that had been her grandmother's and was now theirs. A fact that still had the slight unreality of recent things, the way you touched a new surface and weren't quite accustomed to it yet. He lay in the dark and listened to the farmhouse do what farmhouses did in the night. The furnace cycling, the floor settling, the wind off the fields finding the eaves. Known sounds. He knew every one of them. He thought, I am going to know these sounds for the rest of my life. The thought was simple and enormous, and he sat with it quietly in the dark until it became familiar enough to sleep.
Spring came back to the farmhouse the way spring always came back. Negotiated, incremental, the fields giving up the snow one cold acre at a time. The seed catalog on the kitchen table was a new one. The raised beds waited under their mulch. Gerald's successor, Gerald II, per Ava's specifications, would be planted in May, same corner, same ceremonial attention. Maya turned 8 in April and announced that she intended to learn to ride a bike properly this time, which implied a history Ethan declined to discuss publicly. Ava turned 7 in June and requested a birthday cake shaped like a wolf, having revised her position on wolves significantly since her disagreements with Finn the previous year. The Fox City acquired a second story. Charlotte's board meeting in March was in Seattle, in person, and she went and came back in 3 days with a compromise arrangement that let her remain primarily remote with quarterly in-person commitments, which was what she'd been working toward, and which she reported to Ethan at dinner on a Thursday, with the flat satisfaction of someone who'd made the case on merit and didn't need to celebrate more than was warranted. "How'd they take it?" he asked. "Fine. They had the numbers. The numbers say it works." She passed him the bread. Marcus told them the remote arrangement had produced the most stable growth quarters in the company's history. That was that. "Marcus is a good man," Ethan said. "He really is," Charlotte agreed. "I sent him a very good bottle of wine." "What kind?" "The kind Diane would approve of." Diane would approve. She'd told Charlotte over the phone in November that the supervised visitation order had produced exactly the effect she'd hoped. Victor had attended 3 supervised visits through the winter, each of which was logged and reported, and then had gone quiet. Whether he was recalibrating or simply occupied with other leverages, she couldn't say. But quiet was its own kind of resolution. Victor was not gone from their lives and probably never would be entirely. He was Ava's father, and that fact existed regardless of how poorly he'd used it. But he was no longer the shape in the corner that Charlotte braced against. He was a fact, like the cold front that came through every February, like the furnace that needed its filter changed every 90 days. Managed, accounted for. Not the thing the story was about. The story was about other things. The story was about Ava helping Ethan replace the mudroom floorboard in April and declaring herself officially a repair person and requiring her own tool. A small hammer, purchased at the hardware store in Millbrook, with her name written on the handle in permanent marker. It was about Maya deciding that Charlotte was the right person to ask about a problem she was having with a girl at school, which was a decision she made quietly and without drama, and which Charlotte handled with the directness and care she brought to everything, and which Ethan heard about afterward from his mother, who had heard about it from Maya, who apparently trusted both of them. The story was about a Tuesday evening in May when the 4 of them were at the kitchen table with nothing in particular going on, homework, a crossword Charlotte had abandoned, Ethan's work schedule spread in front of him, and Ava looked up from her drawing and said, apropos of nothing, "I think this is my favorite time." "What time?" Charlotte asked. "Now," Ava said. "All of us here. Tuesday." She went back to her drawing. "It's a good time." Nobody said anything for a moment. Maya kept doing her homework. Ethan looked at his work schedule. Charlotte looked at the crossword she'd abandoned. The farmhouse did what it always did. Held them. It was not a perfect life. It was a real one, which was better. The floor still creaked in the same places. The second stair still settled despite 3 rounds of attention. The north fence would need work again before next winter. There would be board meetings Charlotte didn't want to attend, custody logistics that required careful management, mornings when Maya didn't want to get up, and evenings when Ava pushed every boundary she could identify, weeks when business was slow, and weeks when it was too fast and everything in between. There would be hard days. There had been hard days and there would be more of them. That was not a flaw in the plan. That was just what it meant to build something real, with real people, in a world that didn't adjust its weather for the occasion. What Ethan knew, and what he would have told you if you'd asked him, sitting on that rebuilt porch in the spring light with the mountains where they'd always been, and the farmhouse behind him and the sound of his family inside, was that none of it had been found. None of it had arrived complete. It had been built, piece by piece, out of ordinary things. A service call, a blizzard, a broken furnace, and 2 people who were scared and showed up anyway. That was all it had been. That was everything it had been. He'd driven 18 miles in the dark because a woman he'd never met had a child who was cold. He'd fix the furnace. He'd come back to check on it. He'd fix the steps and the faucet and the fence and the gutter and the porch and the floorboard and every other small broken thing the farmhouse offered him. And in the process, without planning it, without seeing it until he was already inside it, he'd fix the thing that had needed fixing most. Not a furnace, not a porch, the future, his own. The one he'd stopped believing in without noticing he'd stopped. Ava had said it best, the way she said most things. Simply, directly, without any attempt to make it more than it was. You fixed everything, and you stayed. He had. He intended to keep doing both.